Today, we continue our review of the nuclear agreement the Obama administration reached with Iran. This is a critical hearing on one of the most sweeping diplomatic initiatives in years, some say decades, demanding the committee's thorough review. The global threat from Iran has been a focus of this committee for as long as I can remember. Last Congress, we passed comprehensive sanctions legislation by a vote of 400 to 20. It would have given Iran's supreme leader a choice between its nuclear program or economic collapse. But the administration was successful in blocking that legislation. So instead of us considering a verifiable, enforceable, and accountable agreement, we are being asked to consider an agreement that gives Iran permanent sanctions relief for temporary nuclear restrictions. Should Iran be given this special deal? In September, committee members will face the important decision of approving or disapproving this agreement. We will have that vote only because of the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, passed in May, which the administration did not want. To be frank, the administration's preference has been to sideline America's representatives. So I was not entirely surprised when the administration went against bipartisan calls and gave Russia and China and others at the UN Security Council a vote on this agreement before the American public. That's backwards and wrong. We've heard serious concerns from experts about the substance of this agreement. First, Iran is not required to dismantle key bomb-making technology. Does that make the world safer? Second, it is permitted a vast enrichment capacity, reversing decades of bipartisan non-proliferation policy. Does that make the region more stable? And third, Iran is allowed to continue its research and development to gain an industrial-scale nuclear program once this agreement begins to expire in as little as 10 years. 10 years. That's a flash in time. And then Iranian obligations start unwinding. Does this make the world more secure? We appreciate President Obama's effort to secure the most intrusive inspections in history, but it came up short. Instead, there is managed access, with Iran, Russia, and China having a say in where international inspectors can and can't go. The deal's 24-day process is a far cry from anywhere, anytime, and this provision expires too. While the administration has professed absolute knowledge about Iran's program, it is a fact that we have been surprised by most every major nuclear development in Iran's history. And Iran has cheated on every agreement they've signed. So I ask, Mr. Secretary, has Iran earned the right to be trusted? This deal guts the sanctions web that is putting intense pressure on Iran. Virtually all economic, financial, and energy sanctions disappear. And where does all that money go? To the largest terror network on earth. Gone are the sanctions on Iran's nuclear program, but also on the bad banks that have supported Iran's terrorism and ballistic missile development. And to our dismay, Iran won a late concession to remove international restrictions on its ballistic missile program and conventional arms, imperiling the security of the region and our homeland. If this agreement goes through, Iran gets a cash bonanza, a boost to its international standing, and a lighted path toward nuclear weapons. With sweeping sanctions relief, we have lessened our ability to challenge Iran's conduct across the board. As Iran grows stronger, we will be weaker to respond. Yes, the U.S. would roil the diplomatic waters if Congress rejects this deal. But the U.S. still wields the most powerful economic sanctions in the world. Sanctions Iran desperately needs relief from. Sanctions that would continue to deter countries and companies from investing in Iran. I understand the effort the administration has put into this agreement, but these are about as high stakes as it gets. So the committee must ask if we made the most of our pretty strong hand, or are we willing to bet, as the administration has, that this is the beginning of a changed Iran? These are complex issues, and I look forward to what should be an extremely informative hearing. And I now turn to the ranking member.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for convening this hearing. Secretary Kerry, Secretary Lew, Secretary Moniz, welcome to the Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you all for your dedicated service, no matter what side of the issue anybody is on. I don't think anyone here doubts your commitment to the United States and your good intentions on this deal. Thank you for the time you've taken over the last week to engage with members of Congress on the proposed deal, and thank you for your testimony today. Congress gave itself 60 days to renew this deal, and I sincerely hope my colleagues take full advantage of this time to study this agreement, to ask questions, and to make an informed decision when the time comes. We've had many months and many hearings to discuss the different aspects of a nuclear agreement with Iran. But at this point, we're no longer dealing with hypotheticals. We have a specific deal on the table, and we have to decide if that deal advances the national security interests of the United States and our allies. To answer that question, to be fair, we also need to ask ourselves, what is the alternative? Absent this deal, would the international sanctions regime and the P5+1 coalition hold together? If this deal fails, how would we get the Iranians back to the table? Would new sanctions have to be coupled with military action? As I continue to review the deal, though, there are a number of issues that I find troublesome. I hope the three of you will address them in your testimony and as you answer the committee's questions. First, I continue to have concerns that international inspectors will not have immediate access to undeclared sites. Under the agreement, Iran has 14 days to grant access. If Iran refuses access after that time, then members of the Joint Commission could take another week to resolve the IAEA's concerns. After that, Iran has 3 more days to provide access. So we're already nearly a month after inspectors first wanted access, but if Iran continues to say no, another month could go by while this dispute is resolved. That potential length of time gives me pause. I'd like to know how we can be sure Iran cannot use these delays to sanitize sites and get away with breaking the rules. Already, we're seeing Iran's leadership declare that military sites will be off-limits to inspectors. If this is Iran's version of transparency during the implementation of the agreement, we're getting off to a bad start. I'm also troubled by reports about how the arrangement reached between Iran and the IAEA on how Parchin will be inspected. Secondly, I have concerns about the sunset of the international sanctions on ballistic missiles and advanced conventional weapons. Now, my understanding was these weren't on the table during the talks, so I was disappointed to learn that after a maximum of 5 and 8 years, respectively, they'll be terminated. I'd like to understand why we allowed this to happen and what we can do to ensure that this doesn't make a terrible situation in the region get even worse. I'm also concerned about what Iran's leaders will do when sanctions are phased out and new resources come flowing in. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars. Of course, I'd like to see Iran's leaders use this money to help the Iranian people. But even with tough international sanctions in place, Iran has bolstered Hezbollah, Shia militias, Hamas, and the Assad regime. If this deal goes through, how would you propose to keep this newfound wealth out of the hands of terrorists and tyrants? Next, while I'm glad that Iran will be limited in its development of advanced centrifuges for 8 years, I worry what happens down the road. After the research and development ban expires, Iran could quickly move towards the next stage of its enrichment activities. I'd like to know what other provisions in the deal, if any, will mitigate this risk. Finally, I have a fundamental concern that 15 years from now, Iran will essentially be off the hook. If they choose, Iran's leaders could produce weapons-grade, highly enriched uranium without any limitation. They could use advanced centrifuges to speed this progress even further. This amounts to Iran being a legitimized nuclear threshold state in the year 2030. My big question is this: what happens then? Are we back to square one? Is this deal just pushing the pause button for 15 years? I must also say that I have trepidation. Barely a week after the Iranians signed the deal with us, there was the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, chanting death to America, death to Israel. You would think that after the agreement was signed with us, there might be a modicum of goodwill, that perhaps they'd keep quiet for a week or two or a month, but it went back to business as usual. How can we trust Iran when this type of thing happens? It's very disconcerting. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our distinguished witnesses on these issues. Again, I thank you for your service and hard work, and I yield back to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Engel. This morning, we're pleased to be joined by John Kerry, the Secretary of State, Ernie Moniz, the Secretary of Energy, and Jack Lew, the Secretary of the Treasury. Prior to his appointment, Secretary Kerry served as a United States Senator from Massachusetts for 28 years. Before being appointed Secretary of Energy, Dr. Moniz was Professor of Physics and Engineering at MIT, where he was a faculty member since 1973. From Director of the Office of Management and Budget to White House Chief of Staff, Secretary Lew now serves as the 76th Secretary of the Treasury. Gentlemen, welcome. And without objection, the witnesses' full prepared statements will be made part of the record. Members here will have 5 days to submit statements and questions and extraneous materials for the record. And before turning to the testimony, we have most of the members present here. I know we all recognize the gravity of this issue. We want everyone to have a chance to question the secretaries. To accomplish that, I would ask everyone, members and witnesses, respect the time limit, and that means leaving an adequate amount of time for witnesses to answer your questions. And nothing requires full use of your time. So we will begin with a summary of Secretary Kerry's testimony. Mr. Secretary.
Well, Chairman Royce, Ranking Member Engel, and all the members of the committee, thank you very, very much. We genuinely appreciate the opportunity to be here to, frankly, clear up a lot of misinterpretation, some element of public distortion that exists out there. I know there's one ad I've seen on TV has at least 3 or 4 major, absolutely, totally incorrect facts on which it bases the ad. And with all respect to both the chairman and the ranking member, there are conclusions that have been drawn that just don't, in fact, match with the reality of what this deal sets forth. And we happily look forward to clarifying that in the course of this hearing. That's what it's all about. And we welcome the opportunity. We are convinced that the plan that we have developed with 5 other nations accomplishes the task that President Obama set out, which is to close off the 4 pathways to a bomb. And I think as you listen to Ernie Moniz, particularly on the technical components, and see the whole deal, I really believe that that is a conclusion that everybody can come to. Not saying they will, but can. I'm joined by, obviously, 2 cabinet secretaries. Both Ernie and Jack were absolutely critical to our ability to do this. The Treasury Department's knowledge of the sanctions and application of the sanctions has been exemplary, and they helped us understand the implications of all of these sanctions. And as Jack will let you know, we're not talking about $150 billion. We're not talking about $100 billion. We're actually talking about $55 billion that will go to Iran, and we'll go into that later. But from the day that our negotiations began, Mr. Chairman, we were crystal clear that we would not accept anything less than a good deal, one that would shut off all of those pathways towards fissile material for a nuclear weapon. And after 18 months of very intensive talks, the facts are pretty clear that the plan announced this month by 6 nations, in fact, accomplishes that. I might remind everybody, all of those other nations have nuclear power or nuclear weapons. and all of them are extremely knowledgeable in this challenge of proliferation. So under the terms of this agreement, Iran has agreed to remove 98% of its stockpile of enriched uranium, dismantle 2/3 of its installed centrifuges, and destroy, by filling it with concrete, the existing core of its heavy water plutonium reactor. Iran has agreed to refrain from producing or acquiring highly enriched uranium and weapons-grade plutonium for nuclear weapons forever. Now, how do we enforce or verify so that that is more than words? And particularly to speak to the ranking member's question, what happens after 15 years? What happens is forever. We have an extremely rigorous inspection verification regime because Iran has agreed to accept and will ratify prior to the conclusion of the agreement, and if they don't, it's a material breach of the agreement, to ratify the additional protocol, which requires extensive access as well as significant additional transparency measures, including cradle-to-grave accountability for the country's uranium, from mining to milling through the centrifuge production to the waste for 25 years. Bottom line, if Iran fails to comply with the terms of our agreement, our intel community, our energy department, which is responsible for nuclear weaponry, are absolutely clear that we will quickly know it, and we will be able to respond accordingly with every option available to us today. And when it comes to verification and monitoring, there is absolutely no sunset in this agreement. Not in 10 years, not in 15 years, not in 20 years, not in 25 years. No sunset ever. Now remember, 2 years ago, when we began these negotiations, and a lot of people are kind of forgetting, conveniently, sort of where we are today. People are sitting there saying, oh my gosh, in 15 years this is going to happen, or whatever. Iran's going to have the ability to be, capable nuclear power. Folks, when we began our negotiations, we faced an Iran that was already enriching uranium up to 20%. They already had a facility built in secret underground in a mountain that was rapidly stockpiling enriched uranium. When we began negotiations, they had enough enriched uranium for 10 to 12 bombs. Already. Already they had installed as many as 19,000 nuclear centrifuges, and they had nearly finished building a heavy water reactor that could produce weapons-grade plutonium at a rate of 1 to 2 bombs per year. Experts put Iran's breakout time when we began, which, remember, is not the old breakout time that we used to refer to in the context of arms control, which is the time to go have a weapon and be able to deploy it. Breakout time, as we have applied it, is extraordinarily conservative. It is the time it takes to have enough fissile material for one bomb, but for one potential bomb. It's not the amount of time to the bomb. So when we say they'll have 1 year to a certain amount of fissile material, they still have to go design the bomb, test, do a whole bunch of other things. And I think you would agree, no nation is going to consider itself nuclear capable with one bomb. So if this deal is rejected, folks, by the way, when we started negotiations, the existing breakout time was about 2 months. We're going to take it to 1 year, and then it tails down slowly, and I'll explain how that provides us with guarantees. But if this deal is rejected, we immediately go back to the reality I just described, without any viable alternative, except that the unified diplomatic support that produced this agreement will disappear overnight. Let me underscore, the alternative to the deal that we have reached is not some kind of unicorn fantasy that contemplates Iran's complete capitulation. I've heard people talk about dismantling their program. That didn't happen under President Bush when they had a policy of no enrichment, and they had 163 centrifuges. They went up to the 19,000. Our intelligence community confirms, and I ask you all to sit with them, they'll tell you that's not going to happen. So in the real world, we have two options. Either we move ahead with this agreement to ensure that Iran's nuclear program is limited, rigorously scrutinized, and wholly peaceful, or we have no agreement at all. No inspections, no restraints, no sanctions, no knowledge of what they're doing, and they start to enrich. Now, to be clear, if Congress rejects what was agreed to in Vienna, you will not only be rejecting every one of the restrictions that we put in place, and by the way, nobody's counting the 2 years that Iran has already complied with the interim agreement. And by the way, complied completely and totally, so that we've already rolled their program back. We've reduced their 20% enriched uranium to zero. That's already been accomplished. But if this is rejected, we go back to their ability to move down that road. You'll not only be giving Iran a free pass to double the pace of its uranium enrichment, to build a heavy water reactor, to install new and more efficient centrifuges, but they will do it all without the unprecedented inspection and transparency measures that we've secured. Everything that we have tried to prevent will now happen. Now, what's worse? If we walk away alone. Our partners are not going to be with us. Instead, they'll walk away from the tough multilateral sanctions that brought Iran to the negotiating table in the first place. And we will have squandered the best chance that we have to solve this problem through peaceful means. Now, make no mistake, from the very first day in office, President Obama has made it clear that he will never accept a nuclear-armed Iran. And he is the only president who has asked for and commissioned the design of a weapon that has the ability to take out the facilities and who has actually deployed that weapon. But the fact is, Iran has already mastered the fuel cycle. They've mastered the ability to produce significant stockpiles of fissile material. And you have to have that to make a nuclear weapon. You can't bomb away that knowledge any more than you can sanction it away. Now, I was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when a lot of us joined together and put most of the Iran sanctions in place. And I know well, as you do, that the whole point was to bring Iran to the negotiating table. Even the toughest sanctions previously did not stop Iran's program from growing from 163 to 300 to 5,000 to more than 19,000 now. And it didn't stop Iran from accumulating a stockpile of enriched uranium. Now, sanctions are not an end to themselves. They're a diplomatic tool that has enabled us to actually do what sanctions could not without the negotiation. And that is to rein in a nuclear program that was headed in a very dangerous direction and to put limits on it, to shine a spotlight on it, to watch it like no other nuclear program has ever been watched before. We have secured the ability to do things that exist in no other agreement. Now, to those who are thinking about opposing this deal because of what might happen in year 15 or year 20, I ask you to simply focus on this. If you walk away, year 15 or 20 starts tomorrow. And without any of the long-term access and verification safeguards that we have put in place. What is the alternative? What are you going to do when Iran does start to enrich, which they will feel they have a right to if we walk away from the deal? What are you going to do when the sanctions aren't in place and can't be reconstituted because we walked away from a deal that our 5 fellow nations accepted? Now, I've heard critics suggest that the Vienna Agreement would somehow legitimize Iran's nuclear program. That is nonsense. Under the agreement, Iran's leaders are permanently barred from pursuing a nuclear weapon. And there are permanent restraints and access provisions and inspection provisions to guarantee that. And I underscore, if they try to evade that obligation, We will know it, because a civil nuclear program requires full access 24/7, requires full documentation, and we will have the ability to track that as no other program before. The IAEA will be continuously monitoring their centrifuge production, as centrifuges cannot be diverted to a covert facility. For the next 25 years, the IAEA will be continuously monitoring uranium from the point that it is produced all the way through production so that it cannot be diverted to another facility. For the life of this agreement, however long Iran stays in the NPT and is living up to its obligations, they must live up to the additional protocol. And that additional protocol, as we can get into today, greatly expands the IAEA's capacity to have accountability. So this agreement, I'll close by saying this agreement gives us a far stronger detection capability, more time to respond to any attempt to break out toward a bomb, and much more international support in stopping it than we would have without the deal. If we walk away from this deal and then we decide to use military force, we're not going to have the United Nations or the other 5 nations that negotiated with us, because they will feel we walked away. And make no mistake, President Obama is committed to staying with the policy of stopping this bomb. So, in the 28 years, a little more, that I was privileged to represent Massachusetts, I had a 100% voting record on every issue for Israel. First traveled there in 1986. I have great friends there, members of my family, others who care enormously about Israel. I understand the fear. I understand the concerns that our friends in Israel have. But we believe that what we have laid out here is a way of making Israel and the region, in fact, safer. And I emphasize, we do not lose any option in 15 years, 10 years, 20 years, 5 years that we have available to us today. We will push back against Iran's other activities. We've laid out a very detailed policy for working with the Gulf states and others, and we look forward to working with Israel in the effort to do that. Our current security cooperation with Israel is at an unprecedented level, and it's why we have a robust military presence in the region, and it's why we're working so closely with the Gulf states. So, Mr. Chairman, we will continue to push back against Iran on every front available, but the fact is, it's a lot easier to push back against an Iran that doesn't have a nuclear weapon rather than one that does. That's been our principal strategic objective. Deal with a nuclear weapon, and then you have an easier time dealing with the other issues too. The outcome here is critical. We believe this deal makes our country and our allies safer. It will guarantee that Iran's program is under intense scrutiny. It will ensure that the world community is unified in backing this up. And in the end, it will guarantee Iran's program has to be peaceful, and therefore is a good deal for the world, a good deal for America, a good deal for our allies and our friends, and we believe it richly deserves your support.
Dr. Moniz, thank you, Secretary Kerry. Secretary Kerry has been very thorough. Dr. Moniz, if you could be brief, and we'll get back on time, and we'll recognize you at this point.
Thank you, Chairman Royce, Ranking Member Engel, and members of the committee. And thanks for the opportunity to discuss the nuclear dimensions of the Iran agreement, JCPOA, reached between the E3 EU plus 3. The JCPOA prevents Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, provides strong verification measures to give us time to respond if they violate its terms, and takes none of our options off the table. I want to stress that I was backed up in the negotiations by the nuclear competency built up over decades at DOE and supported by this Congress. America's leading nuclear experts at DOE labs and sites were engaged throughout the negotiations. 9 labs and sites in 7 states took part in supporting our negotiating position. These experts, again, were essential, and as a result of their work, I am very confident that the technical underpinnings of this deal are solid, and the Department of Energy stands ready to assist in its implementation. The JCPOA will extend for at least 10 years the time it would take for Iran to produce enough fissile material for a first explosive device to at least 1 year. That's the fissile material being reduced from 12,000 to 300 kilograms. Stringent constraints on Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, as I said, for 15 years. Strong containment and surveillance measures on all centrifuge manufacturing and the uranium supply chain for 20 and 25 years. Verification that Iran is following the agreement is forever stronger than it would be without the agreement. The Iraq reactor redesigned so it's not a plutonium factory, and furthermore, it's plutonium-bearing irradiated fuel sent out of the country for the entire life of the reactor. Thus, the Lausanne parameters are maintained, and all paths to a bomb's worth of nuclear weapons material are addressed. In fact, Lausanne is materially strengthened in the P5+1 Vienna agreement. One important area, and only one, of that strengthening is that Iran will not engage in several activities that could contribute to the development of a nuclear explosive device, including explosively driven neutron sources and multiple point detonation systems. These commitments are indefinite. In addition, Iran will not pursue plutonium or uranium alloy metallurgy for 15 years. Weaponization requirements, especially for missile launch, add to the breakout timeline. Mr. Chairman, I cannot agree that the agreement does not dismantle Iran's technology efforts of relevance to nuclear weapons. In fact, every aspect is rolled back. Returning to verification, the IAEA will be permitted to use advanced technologies, such as enrichment monitoring and electronic seals, technologies that DOE national laboratories have in fact developed. Much has been made about a 24-day process for ensuring IAEA inspectors getting access to undeclared sites. In fact, the IAEA can request access to any suspicious location with 24 hours notice under the additional protocol, which Iran will implement under this deal. The deal does not change that baseline. The JCPOA goes beyond that baseline, recognizing that disputes could arise regarding IAEA access and provides a crucial new tool for resolving such disputes within a reasonably short period of time, so the IAEA gets the access it needs within 24 days. Again, this is the first time that there actually is a cutoff in time. But of course, most important to complement that is environmental sampling provides extremely sensitive measurements of microscopic traces of nuclear materials even after attempts are made to remove the material, and a 2003 example found undeclared nuclear material even after Iran delayed access for 6 months. The combination of the agreement's technical measures and the coherence of the P5+1 dramatically increase the risks to Iran for any attempt to move to nuclear weapons capability. For example, any attempt to enrich to HEU, to high-enriched uranium, at any time must earn a sharp response by all necessary means. In fact, a steep response must be clear from the start for any violation of the agreement. The blocking the covert path, I should emphasize, will always rely, of course, on the work of the American intelligence community and those of our friends and allies. The deal is based on science and analysis because of its deep grounding in exhaustive technical analysis carried out largely, again, by our highly capable DOE scientists and engineers. I am confident that this is a good deal for America, for our allies, and for our global security. This is nicely summarized in the recent letter to congressional leadership by 7 former U.S. ambassadors to Israel and undersecretaries of state, individuals dedicated to strengthening the bonds between Israel and the United States. And I quote briefly, this landmark agreement removes the threat that a nuclear-armed Iran would pose to the region and to Israel specifically. We see no fatal flaws that should call for the rejection of this agreement, and have not heard any viable alternatives from those who oppose the implementation of the JCPOA. As has been stated by many thoughtful analysts, the big gamble would come in turning away from the agreement rather than in implementing the agreement. So thank you for this opportunity to be here. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. We go to Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary Lew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Engel, members of the committee, for the opportunity to be here. This is an important issue, one where I think the full discussion that we're having will make it clear that this will strengthen our national security and that of our allies. The powerful array of U.S. and international sanctions on Iran constitutes the most effective sanctions regime in history. These measures have clearly demonstrated to Iran's leaders the costs of flouting international law, cutting them off from world markets and crippling their economy. Today, Iran's economy is about 20% smaller than it would have been had it remained on its pre-2012 growth path. The United States government stood at the forefront of this effort across two administrations and with the bipartisan support of Congress. Together, we established a web of far-reaching U.S. and international sanctions that ultimately persuaded Iran's leadership, after years of intransigence, to come to the table prepared to roll back its international program. International consensus and cooperation to achieve this pressure was vital. The world's major powers have been and remain united in preventing a nuclear-armed Iran. That unity of purpose produced 4 tough UN Security Council resolutions and national-level sanctions in many countries, and secured adherence to U.S. sanctions by countries around the world. The point of these sanctions was always to change Iran's nuclear behavior, while holding out the prospect of relief if the world's concerns were addressed. Accordingly, once the IAEA verifies that Iran has completed key steps to roll back its nuclear program and extend its breakout time to at least 1 year, phased sanctions relief will come into effect. There is no signing bonus in this agreement. To be clear, there will be no immediate changes to UN, EU, or U.S. sanctions. Only if Iran fulfills the necessary nuclear conditions will the U.S. begin suspending nuclear-related secondary sanctions on a phased-in basis. Sanctions that target third-country parties doing business with Iran. Of course, we must guard against the possibility that Iran does not uphold its side of the deal. That's why if Iran violates its commitments once we've suspended sanctions, we'll be able to promptly snap back both U.S. and UN sanctions. And since preventing the UN snapback requires an affirmative vote from the UN Security Council, the United States has the ability to effectively force the reimposition of those sanctions. Even as we phase in nuclear-related sanctions relief, we will maintain significant sanctions that fall outside the scope of the deal, including our primary U.S. trade embargo and other measures. With very little exception, Iran will continue to be denied access to the world's largest market, and we will maintain powerful sanctions targeting Iran's support for terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, its destabilizing role in Yemen, its backing of the Assad regime, its missile program, and its human rights abuses at home. Just this week, Treasury sanctioned several Hezbollah leaders, building on designations last month targeting the group's front companies and facilitators. And we will not be relieving sanctions on Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, its Quds Force, any of their subsidiaries, or their senior officials. Some argue that sanctions relief is premature until Iran ceases these activities, and that funds Iran recovers could be diverted for malign purposes. And I understand that concern. But Iran's ties to terrorist groups are exactly why we must keep it from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. The combination of those two threats would raise a nightmare scenario. A nuclear-armed Iran would be far more menacing. If we cannot solve both concerns at once, we need to address them in turn. JCPOA will address the nuclear danger, freeing us and our allies to check Iran's regional activities more aggressively. By contrast, walking away from this deal would leave the world's leading sponsor of terrorism with a short and decreasing nuclear breakout time. We must also be measured and realistic in understanding what sanctions relief will really mean to Iran. Iran's $100 billion in restricted reserves, which many fear will be directed for nefarious purposes, constitute the country's long-term savings, not its annual budget. We estimate that after sanctions relief, Iran will only be able to freely access around half of these resources, or just over $50 billion. That's because over $20 billion is committed to projects with China, where it cannot be spent. And tens of billions in additional funds are in non-performing loans to Iran's energy and banking sector. As a matter of financial reality, Iran can't simply spend the usable resources as they will likely be needed to meet international payment obligations such as financing for imports and external debt. Moreover, President Rouhani was elected on a platform of economic revitalization and faces a political imperative to start meeting those unfulfilled promises. He faces over $500 billion in pressing investment requirements and government obligations. Iran is in a massive economic hole from which it will take years to climb out. Meanwhile, we will aggressively target any attempts by Iran to finance Hezbollah or use funds gained from sanctions relief to support militant proxies, including by enhancing our cooperation with Israel and our partners in the Gulf. Backing away from this deal to escalate the economic pressure and try to obtain a broader capitulation from Iran would be a mistake. Even if one believed that extending sanctions pressure was a better course than resolving the threat of Iran's nuclear program, that choice is simply not available. Our partners agreed to impose costly sanctions on Iran for one reason: to put a stop to its illicit nuclear program. If we change our terms now and insist that these countries now escalate those sanctions and apply them to all of Iran's objectionable activities, they just wouldn't do it. They would balk. And we would be left with neither a nuclear deal nor effective sanctions. So it's unrealistic to think that additional sanctions pressure would force Iran to totally capitulate, and impractical to believe we could marshal a global coalition of partners to impose such pressure after turning down a deal our partners believe is a good one. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is a strong deal, with phased relief after Iran fulfills its commitments to roll back its nuclear program and a powerful snapback built in if later on they break the deal. Its terms achieve the objective they were meant to achieve: blocking Iran's paths to a nuclear bomb. That is an overriding national security priority, and it should not be put at risk, not when the prospect of an unconstrained Iranian nuclear program presents such a threat to America and the world. Thank you again, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Lew. To get back to a point that was made, as I read it, the 24-day suspect site process does expire in 15 years. The IAEA additional protocol alone wouldn't deter Iran based on our past experience with their noncompliance with the IAEA. So I think that point stands. The other question I just would like to ask Secretary Kerry relates to what the Secretary of Defense said in his testimony about the I in ICBM. He said stands for intercontinental, which means flying from Iran to the United States. Simply, countries develop ICBMs to deliver a nuclear warhead, and these will be aimed at us, not at Moscow. And at the same time that these missile restrictions are coming off, sanctions on the Iranian scientists involved in their bomb work are also coming off. So how is that making us safer? It seems to me the winner here is Russia, which demanded and won on the lifting on Iran's behalf of these ICBM sanctions. Why did we concede on that?
Well, we didn't concede on that, Mr. Chairman. In fact, we won a victory because we have 7 nations negotiating. 3 of the 7 thought that the sanctions ought to be lifted immediately: Iran, Russia, and China. 4 of them, Germany, France, Britain, the United States, thought they shouldn't. And what we succeeded in doing was keeping both the arms embargo and the missile component, the missiles for 8 years, the arms for 5 years, notwithstanding the fact that Iran has a very legitimate argument, which they were making, that the UN resolution 1929, which is what created the sanctions and the structure we were negotiating under, said that if Iran comes to the table and negotiates, all the sanctions would be lifted. Now, they didn't just come to the table to negotiate. They made a deal. They signed an agreement. They came to an overall agreement. So they felt that they were in compliance with the UN resolution, and we felt, on the other hand, that their behavior in the region was such that it would be unconscionable, notwithstanding, to lift. So the compromise was the 5 and 8, but we don't feel we lost anything whatsoever in that, Mr. Chairman, for the following reasons. The UNSCR, the UN resolution 1929, is a nuclear resolution. Susan Rice she was then at the UN, she put the arms peace in at the last minute. It was a sort of throw in at the last moment into this nuclear resolution. And the nuclear resolution always contemplated that if the IAEA came to what is known as its broad conclusion that Iran was not engaged in any illicit activities in its declared or undeclared activities, then all the sanctions are lifted. So no matter what was going to happen here, we were going to lose both the missile and the arms under the UN component. But here's what we've done in the meantime that we believe actually takes care of this issue. First of all,
Mr. Secretary, I followed the arguments that you've made about the laws that we have to defend against Iran's missile program, and I understand the steps that you took here. I'm just saying big picture, when we end up with a bottom line where in 8 years they get the missile, it doesn't look like a victory. To me, it looks like an own goal. They may not get the missile at that time, but they can buy the technology at that time. The embargo is lifted.
Actually, they can't, Mr. Chairman, because we have, happily, we have several other protocols which prevent that from happening. Specifically, the missile control technology regime prevents that from taking place. We have an executive order by the President of the United States that, in fact, prevents the transfer.
I would just point out there's a reason why Russia pushed it. There's a reason we did not
because Russia didn't want the UN component of this, but they know that we have separate capacities and we will apply them.
I would hope that we could strengthen our hand in this as we go along, but the bottom line is Iran is getting a financial windfall. It increases its support for terrorist proxies. They have announced that recently. It reintegrates into the global economy. It upgrades its conventional weapons. I think it upgrades its ballistic missile program in this over the time of this agreement. It has an industrial-sized nuclear program in 10 years, and that's the time frame only if they don't cheat. So when I look at this and I see that Iran's neighbors who know it the best trust it the least, I just ask, we're presuming Iran is going to change its behavior.
No, we're
and
not.
That behavior did not change last weekend when they were chanting again, death to America.
Chairman, please, with all due respect, we're not presuming any such thing. There's no presumption in here about what Iran will or won't do. There's one objective: make sure they can't get a nuclear weapon. And on the backside of that, we have a very robust initiative that will push back against Iran's other activities. But let me be very specific.
Well, my time's
Executive Order
expired.
12938 authorizes U.S. sanctions on foreign persons that materially contribute to the proliferation of missiles, including efforts to manufacture, acquire, develop, and transfer them by any person or foreign country of proliferation concern. That's just one of about 4 or 5.
My time's expired, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to go to Mr. Engel, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for testifying. I still want to get back to 15 years because, frankly, it's the thing that disturbs me the most. The truth is that after 15 years, Iran is a nuclear threshold state. They're legitimized in this agreement as being a nuclear threshold state, which means they can produce weapons-grade, highly enriched uranium without limitation. I know you can make the argument and say, well, they're already at that point now, but why would we not try to negotiate a deal where they couldn't have those things in 15 years? I also want to mention that a nuclear agreement doesn't whitewash the fact that Iran continues to remain a destabilizing actor in the region and continues to fuel terrorism around the globe. Our friends in Israel rightfully are concerned that Iranian funding of terrorism would continue to affect them in an existential way. One of the issues I've had with this agreement is that from day one, it only focused on limits to Iran's nuclear program. With this agreement, the way I look at it, Iran's financing of terrorism will continue and could become much worse. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps could take advantage of any sanctions relief that results from an agreement between P5 plus one in Iran, because simply put, money is fungible. So I'd like to know how specifically will we work with our allies to minimize the potential windfall to terrorist organizations and protect our allies like Israel. And the other issue I want to raise is that the lifting of the arms embargo and the sanctions, the chairman mentioned some of this, and the sanctions around Iran's ballistic missile program further destabilizes the region. I was very disappointed that these sanctions will eventually be lifted. We had been told that Iranian weapons transfers in their ballistic missile program were outside of the scope of the negotiations. So in my opinion, the changes to these sanctions should have been outside the scope as well. So what that means, when the arms embargo expires, Iran will be able to legally ship weapons to President Assad so he can continue to torture and kill his own people. So how will U.S. sanctions work to address this issue? Would the administration be open to further congressional consideration of new sanctions on Iran's arms activity and ballistic missile program? And finally, because the arms embargo and ballistic missile sanctions are not specifically mentioned in the JCPOA, only the UN Security Council resolution governing the JCPOA, would violations of the arms embargo be considered violations of the JCPOA? Does the snapback of sanctions apply to violations of the arms and missile embargoes? If Iran were to continue to ship weapons to Hezbollah before the arms embargo expires, would they be in violation of the JCPOA?
Well, Congressman, there are so many questions in there. Obviously, we're very happy to come back to you on the record. I want to answer every single one of them. But let me try to take on the biggest ones. First of all, let me just call to everybody's attention here. The IRGC opposes this agreement. So they're not sitting there thinking they're going to get the whole world and be able to go and do what they want to do. One of the reasons they oppose this agreement, and I invite you to talk to the intel community about that, they will document it, is that they see themselves losing the cover of the nuclear umbrella that they'd hoped to have for their nefarious activities. Now, there's nothing here to prevent us from pushing back against the IRGC and others going forward, Congressman. The Congress and others, we're all free to work together to build the pushback against the destabilizing activities. But let me ask you a simple question. Is Iran empowered more destabilizing the region with a nuclear weapon, or stripped of that ability with an international agreement it has to live up to, and then us coming in underneath with a whole set of other security arrangements and pushback? I think the answer to that is crystal clear. Now, you asked the question of what happens with respect to year 15. Folks, under the additional protocol and the modified 3.1 code, please focus on what happens. There's not some sudden break-off at the end of 15 years. They are under remarkable restraints, specifically the comprehensive safeguards agreement that they have to negotiate with the IAEA, which goes on forever, provides the IAEA with the right and obligation to provide safeguards on all source and special fissionable material in Iran to ensure the material is not diverted to nuclear weapons. All non-nuclear weapon states parties under the Non-Proliferation Treaty have to bring this into agreement. The Comprehensive Safeguard Agreement requires Iran to maintain detailed accounting records on all material that's subject to the safeguards, operating records on all facilities subject to the safeguards. All public facilities in their program are subject to the safeguards. It provides for a range of IAEA inspections, including verifying the location, the identity, the quantity, the composition of all nuclear material subject to the safeguards, the design of nuclear facilities. It requires the Board of Governors to take action without delay, that's a quote, in a situation where it's essential and urgent and provides consequences for a finding of noncompliance. That's just on the side of the declared facilities. There are a whole set of requirements for access and inspection and accountability on the undeclared facilities. So, Congressman, they are forever under enormous constraints here with respect to inspections and accountability. They have to provide accountability for all the nuclear research and development activities not involving nuclear material, manufacturing or production of sensitive technology, centrifuge rotor components, construction of hot cells usable for plutonium separation, uranium mines, concentration plants, nuclear waste, all kinds of things. Now let me let Ernie.
Well, may I suggest this, Mr. Secretary? We can respond for the record, Mr. Secretary, to the ranking member's questions. But if we could go now to Eliana Ross-Layton, and the time has expired here, and we'll just get that for the record
On the HEU,
later.
it would be an
Thank you
important-
very much, Mr. Chairman. Last week, the LA Times reported that Iran's foreign minister told the Iranian parliament that under the deal, Iran can deny inspectors access to military sites. Iran's defense minister has also stated that he would not allow international inspectors to enter Iran's military sites. Yet President Obama stated, quote, inspectors will also be able to access any suspicious location. Put simply, the organization responsible for the inspections, the IAEA, will have access where necessary, when necessary, end quote. Can the IAEA really have access to any and all military sites suspected of housing nuclear activity? Does the agency need pre-approval from Iran to access these sites? And the whole point of sanctions, Mr. Secretary, was not to bring Iran to the negotiation table, and dismantling Iran's nuclear infrastructure used to be the administration's goal. The administration repeatedly told us that it would focus sanctions only on its nuclear portfolio, yet in the deal we have over 60 pages of individuals, companies, vessels that will be delisted, specifically mentioned. Many of these sanctions are not nuclear related. The administration has always stated that all provisions within this agreement has to be agreed upon by all parties, which includes allowing the EU to lift sanctions on the Quds Force, including its leader, Soleimani. What do you say, Mr. Secretary, to the families of Americans who were killed or wounded as a result of Soleimani's actions in Iraq? And please explain to them why, as part of the nuclear negotiations, the U.S. agreed that the IRGC Quds Force, that is responsible for countless deaths around the globe, are going to get their designations lifted and will be getting billions of dollars to support their acts of terror throughout Europe. And I'm glad that it's only $50 billion. I feel better already. Secretary Kerry, you will be in Cuba soon. I remain extremely worried about allowing Cuba to open an embassy here in D.C., giving the regime a license to spy against our nation. Will U.S. law enforcement vet every Cuban official, so-called diplomat, who wants to come to Washington, and will we reject any Cuban official who wishes to be posted in D.C. if our law enforcement officials have information related to their espionage apparatus? And finally, Secretary Kerry, when announcing the deal, President Obama said, the Iranian deal, quote, we will continue our unprecedented efforts to strengthen Israel's security, end quote. Will you guarantee that the U.S. will veto any measure at the UN Security Council on Palestinian statehood that calls for anything but a two-state solution through direct bilateral negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians and nothing else?
So, Madam Chair, let me come back to you on the record on a bunch of those, because, again, they're more than we can answer in the time we have, and I appreciate your effort to get a lot of questions, and we will answer them all. Let me just clarify a couple of important things. I want Ernie and Jack to get in here on two things, one on the money and the other on the highly enriched uranium. But just very quickly, there's a confusion here between the dismantling of the nuclear weapons program versus the nuclear program. It was never the goal of this administration, and by the way, not even the Bush administration. The Bush administration in 2008 offered...
Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, perhaps if you could answer about the Soleimani, the lifting of sanctions
Well, I just
of
want
the
to be very
EU,
clear,
which we
though.
agreed to.
I want to be very clear that we are achieving what we set out to do, which is dismantling their capacity to make a nuclear weapon. With respect to the military sites, yes, they will have, providing that is part of the inspection of an undeclared suspicious facility. And if it is, we will have access.
We will have access to the military sites?
If they don't provide it, they will be in material breach of this agreement, and the sanctions will snap back.
And we consult with Iran before we...
Well, there's a
Get
process,
access.
there's a procedure in place, but it doesn't rely on Iran or Russia or China saying yes.
So Iran is wrong when they say that we won't have access to military sites?
No, what they're taking care of a domestic constituency in the way that they feel they need to. They understand that under this agreement,
Thank
what
you.
they say is not as important as what they do.
Thank you.
I'm going to remind the
sorry, my time
members.
is up.
I'm going to remind the members we have 5 minutes. So ask the question, give enough time for response, and then
Could
come
I
in with a
just
second question.
quickly ask-
Mr. Chairman, could I
And what we're going to do is we're going to have the response for the record. But I'm going to encourage the members. We're going to go now to Mr. Brad Sherman of California.
We've got to remember that this is not a binding deal. This is not a treaty. This is not binding on Iran. This is not binding on the United States. It's not even an executive legislative agreement. And these gentlemen here aren't even asking for Congress to approve the deal. I think they'd appreciate it if we didn't pass a formal resolution of disapproval. It might be at most morally binding on this administration. So what may be important for us is to look to see whether it's a good deal in the next couple of years, because I think the administration has plans to follow it, unless we prohibit that. And also try to see whether we will have Congresses and administrations in the future that will take the actions in the future necessitated by our national interest. One quick observation, the IRGC may publicly oppose this deal because that's the best thing the Iranian government can do to persuade us to support, here in Congress, to support the deal, or maybe they genuinely oppose it. But I want to focus on, Secretary Kerry, on your remarks that we've got to focus about dealing with Iran's non-nuclear behavior. And you say we'll be in a stronger position to deal with that, and we have to deal with it. They're holding 4 American hostages. Assad is killing 5,000 people a month, at least, and the blood is on the hands of men in Tehran. And they're supporting Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi, and those are just the organizations that begin with the letter H. You're not going to be able to persuade them to change just by charm, although you bring a considerable amount of that. You're going to need to threaten them with new sanctions unless they change their behavior. And we've seen sanctions cause Iran to change its behavior even on things very important to Iran. Now, I'm not asking you whether you think new sanctions are a good idea, bad idea, whether Europe will follow, whether they won't follow. I'm only going to focus on what's legal under this agreement. You were asked about this in the Senate, and you said we will not violate the agreement if we use our authorities to impose sanctions on Iran for terrorism, human rights, missiles, or other non-nuclear reasons. But you then also noted that there is this comment in provision in paragraph 26 that commits the United States to refrain from reintroducing or reimposing the sanctions specified in Annex 2, which, of course, are the very best sanctions we've got, although we can probably come up with new ones if you tell us that the old ones are forbidden. So you were also asked if we reimpose sanctions on the Central Bank of Iran to deter terrorism, would that violate the agreement? And you said no. But I'd like you to clarify. Is Congress and the United States free under this agreement to adopt new sanctions legislation that will remain in force as long as Iran holds our hostages and supports Assad?
We're free to adopt additional sanctions as long as they're not a phony excuse for just taking the whole pot of the past ones and putting them back. we can put them in place. Let me let
So they need, Secretary Kerry, it's my time, and I've got a lot of other questions.
Not sure what
Now, we've got a number of entities listed on the for their nuclear activities that deserve to be listed for their terrorist activities. It's just you haven't had time to put them on that second list. Will you be putting entities who are on the list of sanctions for their terrorist activity for their nuclear activity on the terrorist list if they deserve it? And can you get that job done before this agreement becomes effective?
Well, we have terrorism sanctions in place right now.
But we've got to list additional entities.
We're free to add, and we have added, by the way.
And we're free to add those who...
We added some 60 entities during the course of these negotiations.
Let me get to one other question. You strongly do not want us to override a presidential veto. But if we do, that triggers certain American laws. I'd like to give you an opportunity, you don't want us to do it, you think it's terrible policy, you think the rest of the world would be against us. But let's say Congress doesn't take your advice. We override a veto. And the law that's triggered then imposes certain sanctions. Will you follow the law even though you think it violates this agreement clearly, and even if you think it's absolutely terrible policy?
I can't begin to answer that at this point without consulting with the president and determining what the circumstances are.
So you're not committed to following the law?
No,
if you think
I said
it's a
I'm
bad
not
law.
going to deal with a hypothetical. That's all. I'd like the Secretary of Treasury to respond on the sanctions.
We're out of time. I'm afraid we're going to have to go to Mr. Chris Smith of New Jersey. But for the record, Mr. Secretary, please put it in the record.
Mr. Chairman, on the
we'll
financial issues and on the sanctions issues, there's a lot of responses to the questions that are being asked. And if we got a minute or two to respond, it might actually be helpful to those who want to understand the agreement.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to the committee, gentlemen. Numerous reports of Iranian collaboration with North Korea, including an article that was written by Assistant Secretary of State Douglas Franz way back in 2003, make it clear that North Korea is collaborating with Iran. One first question, what happens under the agreement if North Korea conveys nuclear weapons to Iran and other capabilities that they certainly have at their disposal? The issue of the arms race is real. I think this incentivizes Saudi Arabia and others, Egypt, to acquire a bomb. So that means the Middle East becomes even more of a powder keg. Saeed Abedini, Hekmati, Rezian, Levinson, when are they going to be free? If you could speak to that, Mr. Secretary. In your opening, even if they break out, they still have to go design the bomb. But that's the problem with this agreement. It once again kicks the issue of the past military dimensions of Iran's program down the road. Iran has been stonewalling the IAEA on this point for years. Inspectors have long been denied access to the Parchin military site, where it is believed that Iran tested detonators for nuclear warheads. Iran has refused inspectors access to the Parchin site for years. In 2013, there were even images showing bulldozing of buildings and removing of roads. Is the IAEA being pressured to accept terms that fail to provide inspectors full access and disclosure? And the last point, Mr. Secretary, yesterday at the TIP report release, you spoke eloquently about and boldly about the combating modern-day slavery. I deeply respect your personal commitment to ending sex and labor trafficking. But while the report is accurate, I am concerned that the designations for several countries missed the mark, and a number of countries got absolutely unmerited upgrades, including Malaysia and Cuba and Uzbekistan. I went back and read the reports from last year and the year before. In China, there were 35 convictions of trafficking, and that's now a watch list country. Cuba, 13 convictions for sex trafficking. The narrative gets it right. None for labor trafficking. They say there's no labor trafficking. It doesn't exist, which is nuts. A year ago, there were 10 convictions. So we're talking about absolutely minimal. Thailand, by contrast, had 151 convictions. They're still Tier 3. And Malaysia had 3 convictions for sex and labor trafficking, a decrease from 9 from last year, and they were Tier 3. The narratives get it right. The designations miss it by a mile.
Well, I'm going to deal with the tip. I'd be happy to sit down with you and talk that through. Since time is so precious here, I want to stay on Iran, and I want my colleague to be able to address a couple of key issues.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just respond to a couple of the issues that have been raised. Congressman Engel asked about the money.
If the gentleman would yield, this is my time.
Well,
I'd really like to know about the question.
Mr. Smith,
If I could.
we'll get answers here to everything. Let's let the witness.
On the question of the flow of money to Iran, there have been a range of estimates as to how much money Iran has locked up. Let's remember why the money is locked up. It's locked up because our international partners worked with us to take Iran's money and not let Iran get it. At the highest number that we see, there's $115 billion that is theoretically available. In reality, 58 to 59 billion of that is unavailable. Roughly 20 billion is tied up in contracts like China, and the balance is things like non-performing loans. Now, I'm not going to say that $56 billion is not a lot of money, but it is not $150 billion, and it cannot all be used because they need to keep some foreign reserves just to run their economy. If you look at the demands in Iran's economy for the use of that money, we see at least $500 billion of competing demands for that $50 billion. So in any kind of an allocation of that resource, you look at what they've done under sanctions, they've managed with sanctions in place to put several $1 million a year towards malign purposes. We can't say that there won't be any more money going to malign purposes, but I think the order of magnitude is way, way smaller, and it's in line with the kinds of spending they've been doing anyway. You compare that to an Iran with a nuclear weapon, the bigger threat to us and our friends in the region is Iran with a nuclear weapon having the same kinds of objectives. On Congresswoman Ross Layton's questions about the IRGC and Soleimani. Soleimani is not delisted. We have not delisted the major entities of the IRGC. There are a few entities whose identity has changed over time, whose leadership has changed over time. Privately, we're happy to go through the individual cases, but we have kept in place our sanctions regime on terrorism.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Now, we've got three questions that were asked by the gentleman from New Jersey. Would just have a succinct answer to those.
On the, Congressman, the greatest incentive for an arms race in the region, for Egypt or Saudi Arabia or one of the other countries to try to get a bomb, will be if this agreement is rejected. And the reason will be that Iran will go back to enriching. We will not have inspection. We will not have insight. And they will say, oh, my God, now they're going for a bomb. Now we have a reason to have to get one. They have, in fact, told us, these countries, that they are not going to chase a bomb, providing the implementation of this agreement continues and providing that we are working with them on the other pushback issues for the region. With respect to the issue of Parchin, yes, there will be access as appropriate under the agreement between the IAEA and Iran, and that is an agreement which is normally entered into confidentially between those countries.
Again, that's the problem. Americans held captive and North Korea gets the bomb or conveys a bomb to Iran. What happens there?
May I comment? I believe I heard you say, Congressman, that that Iran set off a nuclear explosive at Parchin. That is incorrect.
I didn't say that.
Well,
I didn't say it at all.
Those weren't his remarks, if I could just
Really, at least get that right.
interject.
But there will be appropriate access.
But appropriate, how is that defined? But again, on the Americans held captive and on the issue
We are
North Korea
working,
conveys bombs to
Congressman,
Iran, what
we have
happens
been-
under the agreement?
Right. My last conversation with Foreign Minister Zarif and with the brother of the president was regarding the four people being held, the 4 American citizens. And we have followed up on that conversation since then. We are in direct conversations. That's all I'm going to say here today. But I hope that they will be returned to be with their families.
North Korea and a bomb, they convey bombs to Iran. What happens under the agreement? Anything?
If North Korea what?
If North Korea were to provide weapons, nuclear weapons to Iran,
Well,
what happens?
Well, they can't do that, and both Iran and North Korea would be in gross violation of non-proliferation treaty, and we would
North
take
Korea
action.
seems not to care.
All right.
And Iran
So-
would be in violation of this agreement.
So
Boldly,
we have
overtly.
Albio Series from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. You know, there are deep divisions in Iran, evidenced by the comments made by the hardliners and the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and the Supreme Leader. Are these divisions likely to resurface during the implementation of this agreement? And what are the consequences of these divisions for the implementation? Because I keep reading that they're constantly going back and forth, and I'm concerned we get an agreement and the hardliners.
So, Congressman, it's a very, very good question and appropriate understanding the dynamic here. We saw the exact same divisions of things that were being said regarding the interim agreement, if you recall. And what we've learned is it's not as important what they say, it's important what they do, and make sure that their actions are held accountable. Every aspect of the interim agreement has been lived up to, notwithstanding denials that came out publicly from certain politicians or from certain leaders. We've seen the same thing here. We heard that X or Y or Z was a red line that wouldn't be able to do it, et cetera. But the agreement is the agreement. That's why we've been so clear, Mr. Chairman, nothing in this agreement is based on trust. Nothing is based on an expectation of some change of behavior. This agreement is 100 and whatever pages, 9 pages, because it is specific with its annexes in declaring what is expected of whom and when. And that precision is what gives us confidence we'll be able to hold them accountable.
Thank you. And Secretary, you said there's only $56 billion for them to really
It's accessible.
accessible. But really, they do not need a lot of money for some of these groups to start acting up again. I mean, they don't need billions. They can absorb billions, some of these groups.
Well,
So, I mean, there's enough money there to stir a lot of problems.
I mean, the problem is that even with all of the sanctions in place, they're finding the relatively small sums of money that it takes to do terrible acts of regional destabilization and support of terrorism. So they're doing that now with the sanctions in place. And what I'm saying is I don't think you're going to see the shape of that support change, though there will be some more resources available. It'll be on the margin, and it'll be along the lines of what they're already doing, which puts the burden on us and our allies in the region to shut down the flow of money and the flow of material to malign forces. Frankly, one of the issues we discussed with our Gulf allies when we met with them at Camp David was how to work more effectively together to shut down some of those flows of money, things that are happening today with the sanctions in place. So I think the problem exists today with or without an agreement. And the challenge on this money that is Iran's money locked up overseas is it's not in the United States. A lot of the money is in China. A lot of the money is in India. It's in other places. If the P5+1 agreement is rejected by the United States, I don't think we can rely on those other countries keeping that money locked up. So you could end up with Iran getting access to that money without the benefit of an agreement, which would be a very bad outcome. So I think that we have to keep it in perspective. It is a serious issue. We have made the commitment to continue designating, like we did last week, additional Hezbollah actors. We will continue to do that. We have sanctions and secondary sanctions in place. We will double and redouble our efforts on that. We need to get our allies to be part of it. But that's not a reason not to have an agreement to make sure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon.
Also, Congressman, I just underscore, if you look at their activities, they're not capital intensive. What they've been doing with the Houthi, what they've done over the years. I think that our objective here was to make sure they can't have a nuclear weapon. And secondly, to work with our allies and friends in the region in order to do a greater job, a much better job, of pushing back against those activities. And I am going, at the end of this week, I'll be meeting in Doha with the Gulf states. We're laying out with them the very specific steps with respect to that pushback and what we'll be engaged in order to increase the security and push back against these activities you're talking about. But it's impossible to do them all in one pot at one time. First step, nuclear weapon. Now we have the opportunity to press for the changes that we want.
Thank you.
Thank you. We go to Mr. Dana Rohrabacher of California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you and Ranking Member Engel for providing such leadership on this issue. We've had many hearings about it, and Mr. Secretary, let me note that while you're receiving quite a grueling today, let us note that we appreciate the hard work that you and others in the administration are making. We know that you sincerely are looking to make this a more peaceful world, and but some of us realize that in the past we've seen people who are very sincere in seeking peace creating unfortunately setting things off in a direction that led to war and led to more repression and didn't create a more peaceful world. One of the efforts that I noted when I was part of this is how Ronald Reagan succeeded in ending the Cold War. And during that time period, we reached weapons agreements with the Soviet Union. And but let me note, while we were making those agreements with the Soviet Union to put a lid on nuclear weapons in Europe, etc., we ratcheted up our support for the democratic elements who were struggling against Soviet domination in various parts of the world, whether it was in the Soviet Union or in Nicaragua or Afghanistan. We were actually increasing our efforts to support those people. We also denied them hard currency, much less had any agreement that would have bolstered the Soviet economy. And because we had that approach, the Soviet Union fell apart, and in the long run, that is what made a more peaceful world, the elimination of that regime. And I'm afraid that, without fighting, by the way, we eliminated it, I'm afraid that this treaty that you're talking about today and you're promoting will do just the opposite than what we saw succeeded. And that is, it will actually empower the mullahs rather than making it a more peaceful regime and make peace more likely. Empowering the mullahs in the long run will create more chaos, more likelihood of war, because they are the main proponents and supporters of terrorism and, of course, hatred toward the West that we've seen coming from their regime. Now, what I'd like to ask you is that we all know in this body, we've been aware of, for example, the repression and the brutal retreatment of people within Iran, and like the MEK who are suffering, and you've noted this in the past yourself, the brutality that these people who oppose the regime have had to face. Was there any did you confer in any way with the people, the democratic elements in Iran, or these other people who are struggling for a free Iran, and how this agreement will affect their long-term goal for a democratic Iran and thus a more peaceful world?
Well, as you know, this was a nuclear negotiation, but I have on many occasions met with and had discussions with folks representing different interests and aspirations within Iran. What I would say to you, Congressman, and you have to make sort of a hard judgment here about where Iran is. President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif are both individuals who have expressed a very different point of view from the past leadership of Iran.
I've only got a limited amount of time, so your answer is no, that you did not confer.
No, that's not what I said. I said I've had plenty of.
But you're conferring with their oppressors instead.
No,
the fact is that
I don't think
and
I said
during
that
the
at all,
Reagan years, Mr. Secretary, during the Reagan years, when we talk about only $55 billion, well, okay, we'll figure out whether it's $150 billion that the mullahs are going to have, or whether it's $50 billion. But the fact is, part of the effort that worked under Reagan was supporting the democratic elements and undermining the economy of the Soviet Union. In the long run, what will bring peace to this part of the world is not for us to have short-term arms deals with the mullah regimes and the other people who hate the West and are supporting terrorism, but to try to support those elements in those societies that want peace with the West and aren't preparing some sort of holy war against us. I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your sincerity and what you guys are trying to do, but I believe this treaty will empower the mullahs and make conflict more likely.
Mr. Jerry Connolly of Virginia.
I thank the chairman, and I find my friend from California, I find his words ironic, because Ronald Reagan was nothing if not a pragmatist and was quite capable of compartmentalizing relationships for the sake of a greater good. And his relations with the Soviet Union were the quintessence of that kind of pragmatism, exactly what's in front of us today. Something's overriding nuclear capability in the region. Shall we deal with it or not? Samuel Taylor Coleridge described fiction as the willing suspension of disbelief. I must say, I find a lot of fiction involved, the willing suspension of disbelief, in some of the criticism of this agreement. It's not perfect. It will hurt Israel. It will give them a nuclear capability someday. It doesn't do enough. It doesn't deal with ancillary and horrendous behavior. Well, who said it would? And here's the bottom line. Valid though many of those criticisms may be, imperfections we can find by the score. What's your program? And you know what I've heard in a series of hearings here? Let's just go back to the P5+1 and Iran and say, we just couldn't sell it, let's start over. That was one of the most monumentally naive statements I've ever heard. And it came from a former member of Congress who knows better. It's not true. It won't happen. At least let's stick to the facts. But no, the willing suspension of disbelief is at work. It's alive and well here, including the issue of the existential threat to Israel. Walking away from this agreement, you need to take responsibility for the consequences to Israel. Whether you're Bibi Netanyahu or you're a member of Congress, and you got to weigh it real carefully. What will happen? What risks am I willing to take before I cast that vote on behalf of our country and our allies like Israel? Mr. Secretary, I think it's an extraordinary job you've done. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to talk about two problems, and you too, Mr. Secretary, Secretary Moniz. If we walk away from this agreement, what, in your analysis, is likely to happen? And secondly, Secretary Moniz, to me, one of the real vulnerabilities in this agreement is that 24-day problem. All of us have reason to be concerned about that. That's not quite the robust inspection we had hoped for.
So I'm going to be very quick because I want Ernie to get in here. But it's not speculation. It is clear. If Congress rejects this, Iran goes back to its enrichment. The Ayatollah will not come back to the table. Anybody who makes that judgment has not talked to the intel community. There is no way, given his feelings already about the West and his mistrust of us and his reluctance to even have engaged in this discussion, that he's suddenly going to re-enter if we reject this. Moreover, the sanctions regime completely falls apart. The folks we relied on to provide a united front here, France, Germany, Britain, China, Russia, go off, and we will have set ourselves back, folks. I don't know how I go out to another country, if that happens, and say, hey, you ought to negotiate with us, or you ought to talk to us about any issue, whatever it is, with a reliance that we can actually deliver. Because they will sit there and say, well, you got 535 secretaries of state in the United States. We don't know who we're negotiating with. And whatever deal we make always risks being overturned. That is not the traditional relationship that has existed between the executive and the Congress. And so, and finally, Iran will say, we're free. We can go back to our program. And what I said earlier about bringing year 15 to today, it happens, year 20, whatever it is. They will take their 19,000 centrifuges. They have the ability to enrich, and they will feel we backed off. Ernie, would you address the...
Yeah. First, let me just add that from my 5 months at the negotiating table, I doubt our P5+1 partners would be any more interested in going back to the table than Iran. On the 24 days, again, let me emphasize that all the regular access, well, for declared sites, it's constant. The 24 days is a new tool in the sense that there's never been any limit at all. And so the key is in getting enough of a compressed process where we feel confident in being able to detect any use of nuclear materials, number one, over that time period. And in a classified environment, we could provide even more evidence than I've already discussed today.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We go to Steve Chabot of Ohio.
Record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary. This administration, the president specifically, called ISIS famously the JV team. Now, that clearly wasn't true. This administration cited Yemen as the model approach to U.S. counterterrorism, and that was shortly before Yemen's near total collapse into chaos. So that wasn't true either. President Obama declared al-Qaeda to be decimated, on the run, broken apart, on their heels, very weak. And those are all quotes, by the way. Now, that may be wishful thinking, but it certainly wasn't true and isn't true. Why should the American people trust the administration now on this deal?
We're not asking them to trust. We're asking them to read the deal and look at the components. As I've said many times, nothing in this deal is built on trust. Nothing. It is on very specific steps that have to be taken. For instance, Iran gets zero relief from the sanctions until Iran has implemented the one-year breakout time by destroying the calandria, taking out their centrifuges, undoing their electrical, undoing the piping. They have to do all of that.
As you know, I've got limited time, so I'm going to move on to my next
All
question.
I'm
But when you
saying
say
is
that
they have to
it
take
doesn't
specific
depend on
steps.
trust, that just strains credibility, I think, to say there isn't trust on both sides involved in this. There has to be, or there's no deal. Now, sticking with this theme on trust, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Relative to anywhere, anytime inspections, you said, and I quote, this is a term that honestly I never heard in the 4 years that we were negotiating. Now, in fact, in April this year, Deputy Secretary Advisor Ben Rhodes had said that the International Atomic Energy Agency would have immediate access to any site that the agency wanted to inspect. Now, immediate access sure sounds like any time to me. And also in April, Energy Secretary Moniz, who's the gentleman sitting next to you there, he said, and I quote, "We expect to have anywhere, anytime access to places that are suspected of out-of-bounds activities," unquote. There's that anywhere, anytime once again. So again, why should the American people trust what they're being told by this administration about this deal?
May I say, my quotes have been anytime, anywhere, in the sense of a well-defined process and a well-defined timescale, and that's what we have.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
but let me go further than that. I've been negotiating.
That really clears things up, Mr. Secretary, so thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Secretary.
Well, we never had a discussion in the context of these negotiations that talked about anywhere, anytime. Nowhere on the planet Earth does any country, anywhere under the NPT, have anything called anywhere, anytime. What we have is called managed access, and it's a process by which we get in. Now,
we're this 24 days, okay? I mean,
Please,
that
let me just
came out
answer.
24 days,
Let me answer
and we
the
know
question.
that that's longer. That's months,
24
actually.
days is an outside period of time, during which time, and for 24 years or longer, 2,400 years, they would not be able to hide the remnants of nuclear activity, of fissional material. And Ernie Moniz will tell you that. But
Mr.
leaving that
Secretary,
aside,
as you know, I've only got 5 minutes.
24
I've got
days,
several more
I know, but-
questions. Let me ask you this: if this is
Congressman, we love
such
asking
a
questions and having no
good
answers.
deal, if this is such a good deal, why is Israel so opposed to it?
well, first of all, I understand when you say Israel, there are people in Israel who support it. There are
Like,
people.
and the Prime Minister, okay, he's the representative, just like President Obama is the representative of our country
I
on these
understand,
types
and
of
you'll
negotiations.
agree that President Obama always talks for everybody in the country, right?
Well, he's sure speaking for us in this agreement, and he seems bound and determined to go forward with this thing, whether the elected representatives of the American people, the majority of us at least, are for it or not.
Let me speak to your question, because it's a serious question, it's important. As I said earlier, we fully understand every Israeli has concerns, have fears. There are concerns about the region they live in, about the nature of the rhetoric that's used, death to Israel, death to America. Everybody is concerned, which is why this is not based on some element of a dream they're going to change or some element of trust. But I will tell you, there are people in Israel who...
You're going to name a couple of people. The Prime Minister is against it, and I'm almost out of time. This is one of the main reasons, as a representative of the American people, I'm so concerned. Because Israel could be directly affected, but with these ICBMs and the technology that could be coming, it could make American cities at risk.
Excuse me, Mr. Shabbat. We've got to go to Mr. Ted Deutsch of Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Secretary Kerry, thank you as well on behalf of my constituents' family, Robert Levinson, for continuing to raise his plight and that of the 3 other Americans who are held. And I agree with you that it's time for them to come home. I want to talk specifically about PMD, because if we don't address PMD, the military dimensions of the program, then it's impossible for us to believe that the IAEA will have the credibility it needs going forward. Under the terms of the agreement, the nuclear-related activities that are set forth that need to be satisfied in order for there to be sanctions relief refer to the roadmap, the IAEA Iran roadmap, except they leave out the most important point, which is the one that the IAEA has to have final resolution of PMD. So I have 2 questions. The first question is, will we have access, will the IAEA have access to Parchin? The second question is, am I right, because I don't see any other way to read the agreement, that satisfaction of PMD will not be a prerequisite to Iran getting sanctions relief?
It is. It is a prerequisite. If they haven't complied with the IAEA and lived up to the dates that are laid out in the program, August and October, they will not get relief.
But Mr. Secretary, I acknowledge that. But by October 15th, they have to have activities that they need to set out what they're going to do. But it's December 15th by which the Director General and the Board of Governors will assess whether or not they've complied, and that's not a condition under the deal.
Actually, it is. They'd be in material breach if they don't do this. We've told them that, and they understand that.
I understand, but it's
moreover.
I would just point out it's specifically omitted in the list of past and present concerns. It's not a requirement. But,
well, the outcome. If you're talking about the outcome, it's not dependent on the outcome, because the outcome we have no way of knowing which way. Obviously,
but that's the issue, Mr. Secretary.
No, it's whether they comply or not. We know what they were doing. We've already drawn our conclusion about 2003. We know they were engaged in trying to make a weapon.
So that's my point.
So
this
it's not the outcome that
this is important. So you're saying that even
compliance,
right? So if they comply with the IAEA and but the IAEA ultimately concludes that they're not satisfied on PMD, either because they don't have access, because they didn't get access to the sites,
and they're not in compliance,
because they didn't get access to the scientists.
That would be a breach. We would not do sanctions relief. They know that.
Then I would respectfully suggest that it's not at all clear in the agreement. We could talk about that. I'd like to just move on to the issue of specifically the sanctions. This has been brought up by a number of my colleagues. The Annex 2 that lists lots and lots of individuals and entities that are getting sanctions relief under this deal. Many of them are involved in not just proliferation activities, but they're also involved in terrorism, support for terrorism. They're involved in human rights abuses. They went on this list because it was easier to get our European allies to go along with the proliferation sanctions. And I have a very specific question. Secretary Lew, I appreciate that we're going to continue to sanction Hezbollah. But what I really want to know is, will we be able to, and are we going through the process now of scouring this list, not just for individuals, but for banks and shipping lines and state-owned companies, to reimpose sanctions if they're subject to sanctions for terrorism?
Well, Congressman, first, we have not listed for relief many entities.
I understand, but
RGC is not relieved.
But I'm asking about this list.
There are institutions that were designated for their acts of terrorism or regional destabilization that have not been relieved. Construction firms,
Mr. Secretary, I understand that. I have a very specific question. Will we be able, under this agreement, to reimpose sanctions on all of these individuals and entities if we find they should be because of their terrorism?
Congressman, we have retained all of our rights to designate firms and individuals under terrorism sanctions.
Including everyone listed in this annex.
Including entities who are on the list.
Great.
What we cannot do, and this is what Secretary Kerry was saying a few minutes ago, we cannot just put in place the nuclear sanctions with a new label.
No, I understand.
We have given up no ability to target individuals or entities.
Including, I hope we're going through the list and scouring it right now. I only have a few seconds left, and I would just ask, I would just ask for some acknowledgement that when we say that Iran is engaged in all these terrible activities now and it doesn't cost much money, I would suggest that as it's been reported that $200 million a year is the amount that they use to fund Hezbollah. So if only $1 billion of the 56 were to go to Hezbollah, we would double the amount of support for 5 years, at which time the arms embargo comes off, and it's considerably more dangerous. We have to at least acknowledge that that's
Congressman, we can put the arms. There are plenty of opportunities to deal with the arms.
Joe Wilson,
There is a UN resolution preventing them from taking weapons to Hezbollah. There's a resolution preventing them from sending weapons to Iraq, preventing them from sending weapons
I'm
to
concerned about weapons coming.
At this time, we've got to go to Joe Wilson of South Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Ed Royce and Ranking Member Elliott Engel for hosting this hearing, and I appreciate the panel being here today. Secretary Kerry, I share the concerns of an op-ed by David Horowitz of the Times of Israel, where he presents 16 reasons the nuke deal is a catastrophe for the Western world. I will present these as questions for the record for you to answer during the coming month. We need this as a response for the American people so that as we vote in September, the American people will know, as you stated a few minutes ago, the correct facts. One, was the Iranian regime required to disclose the previous military dimensions of its military nuclear program in order both to ensure effective inspections of all relevant facilities? No. Two, has the Iranian regime been required to halt all uranium enrichment, including thousands of centrifuges spinning at the main Natanz enrichment facility? No. Has the Iranian regime been required to shut down and dismantle the Arak heavy water reactor and plutonium production plant? No. 4, has the Iranian regime been required to shut down and dismantle the underground uranium enrichment facility it is building at Fordo? No. 5, has the Iranian regime been required to halt its ongoing missile development? No. 6, has the Iranian regime been required to halt research and development of the faster centrifuges which will enable it to break out the bomb far more rapidly than is currently the case? No. 7, has the Iranian regime been required to submit to anywhere, anytime inspections of any and all facilities suspected of engaging in rogue nuclear-related activity? No. 8, has the international community established procedures setting out how it will respond to different classes of Iranian violations to ensure that the international community can act with sufficient speed and efficiency to thwart a breakout of the bomb? No. 8, has the Iranian regime been required to halt its arming, financing, and training of Hezbollah terrorist army in South Lebanon? No. 10, has the Iranian regime been required to surrender for trial the members of the leadership placed on an Interpol watch list for the alleged involvement in the bombing by the Hezbollah suicide bomber of the AMIA Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1994, and resulting in the deaths of 85 people? No. 11, has the Iranian regime undertaken to close its 80 estimated cultural centers in South America from which it allegedly fosters terrorist networks? No. 12, has the Iranian leadership agreed to stop inciting hatred among its people against Israel and the United States and stop its relentless calls for the annihilation of Israel? No. 13, has the Iranian regime agreed to halt executions, currently running at an average of some 3 a day, the highest rate in 20 years? No. 14, does the nuclear deal shatter the painstakingly constructed sanctions regime that forced Iran to the negotiating table? Yes. 15, will the deal usher in a new era of global commercial interaction with Iran, reviving the Iranian economy and releasing financial resources that Iran will use to bolster its military forces and terrorist networks? Yes. 16, does the nuclear deal further cement Iran's repressive and ideologically rapacious regime in power? Yes. I'm going to be submitting these for the record, and I look forward to receiving them during the next month. In the meantime, the American people need to know there's bipartisan opposition to this deal. I was really grateful. 2 weeks ago, we had Senator Joe Lieberman here who addressed my concern, and that is that the Secretary of State designated Iran a state sponsor of terrorism over 30 years ago in response to the hundreds of Marines who were killed at the Marine barracks. And I asked Senator Lieberman, has there been a change in course? His quote directly, This Iranian government, the Islamic Republic of Iran, has the blood of a lot of Americans on its hands. The Marines at the barracks in Beirut, the soldiers of Khobar Tower, and I would go on. Incidentally, hundreds of American soldiers were killed in Iraq by Shia militias that were trained in Iran by the IRGC. So your question is a good one. Has the government changed? There's no evidence of change. Mr. Secretary, has there been evidence of change?
Yes, in that the president of Iran sent his foreign minister to negotiate an agreement to which I could pose you a lot of questions that I can give you the answer to that are yes to. Does Iran have to give up 2/3 of its centrifuges for 10 years? Yes. Does Iran have to annihilate its
And Mr. Secretary, those
yes.
are words and promises.
If the gentleman will suspend, your time has expired.
Yes.
I've suggested to the members, ask the questions and leave time for response. We're going to Brian Higgins of New York. Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The snapback provisions in this agreement are real and powerful, and I think are born out of a deep distrust of Iran. The snapback provisions, as I understand them, allows for any of the 6 powers to the deal to flag what it considers a violation. That concern would be submitted to a dispute resolution panel. If those concerns remain unresolved, the sanctions would resume or snap back after 30 days. Preventing a resumption of sanctions would require a vote of the Security Council from which the United States and its Western allies would have veto power. It's unprecedented and I think very, very powerful and speaks volumes to this deal. Under this deal, uranium would be cut by 98%. The level of enrichment for what remains is 3.67%, a long way from the 90% enrichment that would need to occur to achieve a weapons-grade or fissile material. Centrifuges would be reduced from 19,000 to a little over 6,100 for 10 years. There would be no enrichment at Fordo, and only centrifuges permitted for use would be older first-generation centrifuges. Plutonium. The Iraq facility would be reconstituted so it cannot make weapons-grade material, and materials that do exist there today would be sent out of the country entirely. Number 4, Iran may try to build a nuclear weapon in secret. Mr. Secretary of Energy, I would ask you, through robust monitoring and verification and inspections, the deal would allow inspectors access and to inspect any suspicious site. I heard critics of this plan say that, well, that's like, because of this 24-day period, it's like a police officer calling a drug dealer and to say that we're going to raid your apartment in 24 days so that they can clear all the evidence. Would you speak to this within the context of physics and talk about the half-life of both uranium and plutonium?
I'll start with the last question then, if I may. Well, first of all, technically on the half-life, the half-life of the dominant uranium isotope is roughly the age of the Earth, which is why it still exists in the Earth, and that of the uranium-235, which is the isotope that you would want to enrich for a nuclear weapon, is somewhat shorter and therefore is more rare in nature. However, the issue of first of all, the analog to putting the drugs down the toilet is not very applicable to the use of nuclear materials. And as I've said, in both unclassified and classified regimes, we have extraordinarily sensitive ways of finding minuscule amounts that are left over from using nuclear materials, whether it's enrichment or whether it's in an explosive environment, to understand its nuclear weapons behavior. So on that, we're very, very clear. And in addition, we have other constraints on them, some of them forever, in terms of other parts of weaponization, like neutron sources, where we also would have some interesting signatures should there be suspicious activity.
Secretary Lew, you had dealt with the issue of the projected amount of money that would be available to Iran once the sanctions are lifted. Iran's currency is lost. My understanding is most of that money is Iranian money in foreign accounts, frozen in foreign accounts. In that, Iran's currency has lost about half its value over the past 3 years. Was that factored into your estimate about the amount of money which will be available to Iran once it comes back to them?
Congressman, I was addressing the specific issue of their reserves that are tied up overseas because of sanctions. We have done enormous damage to their economy. It will take them years to get back to where they would have been if sanctions had not put in place, even if they got that money back. So they're not looking at breaking out into a period of great growth. And I think the challenge here is, we have a pretty good understanding of what the pressures in Iran are right now. We can't, know with certainty what decisions they'll make. We know that, for example, just to get their oil fields up and running properly would require an investment of $100 to $200 billion. So I can't tell you how much of the $50 billion they'll apply to their oil fields, but you have to assume that one of the things they're going to want to do is get their economy moving. So that money will quickly be used for a lot of purposes. I wish I could say that zero, not a nickel, would go to malign purposes. But even with the current sanctions regime, they're finding the money to put into malign purposes. The question is, do they do it with or without a nuclear weapon?
Mike McCall of Texas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kerry, the countries that know Iran the best fear this agreement the most. And the reasons why are that for the following reasons. It lacks the necessary verification measures to ensure Iran does not cheat. It lists the restrictions on Iran's intercontinental ballistic missiles, which the Ayatollah himself said they will mass produce. The international sanctions on the Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, its terror arm, will be relieved, and the European sanctions. This deal could also, in my judgment, spark a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, as the Saudis told me when I recently visited there. And as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, what concerns me the most is this deal frees up hundreds of billions of dollars to the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. Susan Rice, the president's national security advisor, said, quote, "We should expect that some portion of that money will go to the Iranian military and could potentially be used for the kinds of bad behavior that we've seen in the region." And now you're asking this Congress to endorse an agreement that the president's own national security advisor admits will spread terror in the region. Finally, Iran's deputy foreign minister confirmed we will provide weapons to whomever and whenever we consider appropriate, and we will buy weapons from wherever we can. Chairman Royce and I sent a letter, sir, to you and the President of the United States, asking you to first submit this deal for consideration by the American people through their representatives first, before this deal was submitted to the United Nations. But instead, you went around the Congress and the American people, submitted this to the United Nations, and then China, Russia, and Venezuela got a chance to vote on this and approved this agreement before we've had a chance to deliberate. My question is this: if the Congress overrides the president's veto, what effect would that have on this deal? In other words, would it kill the deal?
Yes, we've said that many times. But let me come back to your earlier comment.
But just this is a very important point. Will the UN and EU sanctions be lifted, and that will relieve Iran of these burdens? Or would, if we override the president's veto, would it collapse the entire international deal?
The sanctions rely on the international community's participation to be able to enforce them. Our sanctions alone did not do the job alone. It wasn't until we went out and worked with other countries diligently, China, for instance, in order to persuade them not to buy X amount of oil, countries in the Middle East to not be trading underneath the table or otherwise. There are a lot of different things necessary to make these sanctions work. If the United States unilaterally, through congressional decision, pulls away from this deal, they're not going to continue to apply those sanctions. They have no reason to. They're gone. They've already said they're gone. And with respect to Saudi Arabia, there was an AP article the other day when Ash Carter visited Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister said Iran's nuclear deal appears to have the provisions needed to curtail Iran's ability to obtain a nuclear weapon.
Well, my time's limited. I've heard otherwise from sides, but let me just, that's very important for us.
That's a very public comment.
For us in the Congress to understand that if we override the president's veto, it will stop this entire agreement. I think that's important for us
But what I'm
as members
hearing
of Congress to
here
know.
from everybody-
I've got one more question. It's been debated by the Secretary Lew and yourself that you did not approve the delisting of the Quds Force commander, the Iranian terror arm, from the European sanctions list. That was, I'm looking at the agreement right here. They're taken off the list, of the European list, which is an agreement that was approved by you. The Quds Force, who was killed, they killed Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. What do I tell my Gold Star mothers back home whose children were killed by these Iranian forces, and tell them that this agreement will take them off the list?
Tell them that the United States of America will continue to keep the sanctions on him. Specifically, he remains designated by our country, and we will not ever lift them, and that the United States will be pushing back on them. But look, here's what I'm...
My final question is this, this secret deal between the IAEA and Iran.
There's no secret.
We've never seen this. Are you going to present that to the Congress?
There's no secret deal. There is an agreement, which is the normal process of the IAEA, where they negotiate a confidential agreement, as they do with all countries, between them and the country. And that exists. We have briefed on it.
Are you going to present that to the Congress?
We don't have it. It is not.
Have you seen it?
We have been briefed on it. I have not personally seen it. But can I just say something? You know, we hear these complaints. We hear, well, this agreement doesn't do this, doesn't stop their terror. This agreement's going to give them some money. This agreement's going to do this. What this agreement is supposed to do is stop them from having a nuclear weapon. Now, I want to hear somebody tell me how they're going to do that.
We're going to go
without
to
this agreement.
Mr.
I'd like
Secretary.
to know how you
We're going to go to Mr. William Keating of Massachusetts. The gentleman's
they have
time's
an ability
expired.
to go enrich again. What's the next step for the United States? Nobody's answering that question.
Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank our witnesses for being here and their hard work. Three threads I'm going to throw out there, and one of them, there have been reports in the media that have surfaced that among our European partners in this, there was reluctance, and those reports centered on France in particular. I'm curious, and you can answer all three at the end. I'm curious what issues that you can detail that they might have had qualms about, issues that weren't addressed, and I want you to comment on those reports. Number two, if you could generally comment about the cooperative actions of North Korea and Iran and how this might be impacted. Number three, we've had witnesses before on this issue, and they really were forceful, including Ambassador Burns. They were forceful in saying it's important that we send a strong military message should any agreement go forward. And when it comes to sales and transfer of arms and other things, you began to speak to this. I want to give you the time to address what military options, what are our strongest options that we still have as a country, and how we can act on this. And I'm going to give all three of you the remainder of my time so that you can answer some questions, and I won't be interrupting you.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Let me just say very quickly, because I want my colleagues to have a chance to catch up here, but on the European partners, France, in the final comments when they signed on to the agreement, it was Bastille Day, July 14th, and the foreign minister said that he thought this agreement was not only a strong agreement, but he hoped it would be remembered in the same way as having a positive impact for the world, the way Bastille Day was remembered as having the impact for the development of France. And they supported this agreement and voted for it. With respect to North Korea and Iran, this is a very different agreement from anything that ever existed with North Korea. There are about 7 or 8 different major differences between the North Korean agreement, not the least of which is North Korea pulled out of the NPT, and North Korea had already exploded a nuclear weapon, and Iran has not, and there's many differences, and I'd rather lay them out on the record if we can. But this covers all possible nuclear-related activities. The agreement with North Korea did not. And we also have consent to the process of inspections, North Korea did, their whole series of things. Finally, on the military option, I've said it again and again, everybody has, Ash Carter has reiterated it. President Obama is the only president who has actually commissioned the development of a weapon that can do what is necessary to deal with the facilities that are at risk. And he has not only commissioned its design, he has deployed it, and he has made it clear that Iran will not get a weapon. He's prepared to use any option necessary in order to achieve that, but his preferred option is the one he is pursuing here, which is a diplomatic solution and which resolves this issue in a way that avoids the conflict that some people seem to be not even addressing, which would be almost inevitable as a consequence of not accepting this deal. Ernie?
Well, in terms of the first question about the dynamics with the EU or the other partners in general, first of all, on the nuclear dimension side, I should emphasize that I've talked about our team, but every one of the 6 countries had technical experts involved, and they had very robust discussions. We did not share our own classified calculations, but made sure we were coming out in the same place. And to be honest, in many areas, we pushed the envelope. In some areas, they pushed the envelope. And the good news is, I think we all came out of this very satisfied that the technical dimensions accomplished the job of blocking nuclear weapons pathways. There are some specific examples one could give in terms of additional infrastructure removal from centrifuge places in both Natanz and Fordo, in terms of 20% uranium issues. But these were very robust, and I think all 6 countries feel very, very confident in our conclusions.
Congressman, I think that on the sanctions side, we have very different systems here in the United States and the EU. And the questions that we're getting on IRGC kind of underscore the fact that we need to look at our system and their system and understand that they're different. They are not delisting the IRGC for terrorist activities. If they do, at the end of phase 2, delist for nuclear, the terrorist sanction still stays in place. So I think people looking at the document ought to understand what is actually going to be in place after it's in effect. And I think the cooperation with the Europeans on this requires that we not distort what they're doing. They're not taking the IRGC off of their terrorist list.
Judge Ted Poe of Texas.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have received numerous questions from people in Texas, and I will submit those for the record. They're pretty simple questions, but I will submit those for you to answer. And Secretary Kerry, this question is for you. Following up on Chairman McCall's comments about the secret deal, Secretary Rice said that she has seen this deal with the IAEA and that it will be shared with Congress. So if she's seen it, have you seen it?
I don't believe that Susan Rice, National Security Advisor, has seen it. I think she
said she did 6 days ago. She said 6 days ago she had seen it and reviewed it, and that Congress will get to see it in a classified section. My question is, have you seen it?
No, I haven't seen it. I've been briefed on it,
but you haven't read it. You haven't seen it. Let me ask you this:
we don't possess it. It's in the possession of the IAEA.
Are you going to read it?
We don't have access to the actual agreement, or at least.
But Secretary Rice has access to it, but you don't have access to it.
I don't know about that.
Well, that's just what she said. I'm just going on what she said. Is the policy of the United States still that Iran will never have nuclear weapons?
Yes.
Is it the policy of the Ayatollah, if you can answer for him, that Iran wants to destroy the United States? Is that still their policy as far as you know?
I don't believe they've said that. I think they've said death to America in their chants, but I have not seen a specific.
Well, I kind of take that to mean that they want us dead. That would seem like that would be their policy. He said that. You don't think that's their policy? I'm not mincing words. Do you think it's their policy to destroy us?
I think they have a policy of opposition to us and a great enmity. But I have no specific knowledge of a plan by Iran to actually destroy us. I do know that the rhetoric is is beyond objectionable. I know that we, are deeply concerned with Iran's behavior in the region, deeply concerned with their past activities, which is why President Obama felt...
Reclaiming my time. I got your answer. Let me ask another question. I'm reclaiming my time, Senator. Thank you, Secretary. We've heard a lot of comments
if they did want to destroy us, they got a much better shot of doing it if they had a nuclear weapon.
But you don't know if it's their policy or not. That's my answer. That's the question, and that's your answer. Next question. Is it our policy or our belief that after the deal, whether the deal's approved or not, do we have a policy in the United States that we want, expect, desire a regime change by the people of Iran to have their own say, free government, free elections? Is weigh in on our policy toward a regime change in Iran?
Well, as you know, Congressman, President Obama was very outspoken with respect to support for transformation in Iran around the time of the elections. Our policy today is specifically focused on pushing back on their activities within the region that destabilize the region, threaten Israel, threaten our friends and allies. And that is specifically where we are gearing up to take a specific set of steps that will define a new security alliance for the region.
Okay. So we want to push back. We want them to stop their naughty ways. But regime change, I personally think the best hope for the world for safety, including in Iran, is for the people of Iran to have free elections and that the people of Iran really decide who their government should be in a free setting. Let me ask you another question. Secretary Moniz, this might be my last question. If I understand the agreement, the oil sanctions, which is prohibiting Iran from exporting oil, that's going to be lifted. Is that correct?
Well, if sanctions are relieved, that would be among those relieved, correct?
Under this deal, that's one of the ones that will be relieved.
If sanctions are relieved, yes, then oil exports.
Now, being the Secretary of Energy, let me ask you this. Why is the United States lifting the sanctions on the exporting of oil on Iran, but we're not lifting the sanctions on America exporting crude oil, like Texas sweet crude?
We don't have sanctions on oil exports. We have a congressional law that in the 1970s restricted exports.
Do you support that law being changed? That's the question. You know that's the question. Do you support the law being changed?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Okay, I'll put that in
for
writing.
the record.
Mr. Chairman,
we need to go to David Cicilline of Rhode Island.
Mr. Chairman, just a point of personal privilege here. I wanted to make sure we knew what we're talking about, and the record properly reflects this. Susan Rice's quote is, "We know their contents and we're satisfied with them. We will share the contents of those briefings in full and classified sessions with Congress." She has not seen them. She's been briefed on them.
And that question
and we are of course, if reclaiming my time, we are still looking forward to that briefing. But now we must go to David Cicilline of Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses, not only for being here today, but for the ongoing conversations. And I want to particularly thank the administration for really making sure that members have all the information that we need as we navigate through a very sober decision-making process with enormous consequences. And I thank all three of the secretaries for their service. I have a series of questions that I'm not asking to support a conclusion that I've already made, but actually to help me in arriving at the right conclusion. So I'd like to set forth the questions, recognizing you can answer some, and then the others, if you would submit in writing, I'd appreciate it. The first is on Parchin. The agreement says that the IAEA will provide progress reports by October 15th and then the final assessment by December 15th. We know obviously that this is a site where there was nuclear testing of some kind. My first question is it at all concerning that this final conclusions or the set of final conclusions might inform in a substantive way whether we should go forward? And is there any concern that there will be something revealed in this report that would impact whether or not Iran is in compliance from the outset? That's the first question, because we'll be asked to vote on, and the first round of sanctions relief will be provided before, obviously, that December 15th date. Second question is, it's been argued that we're in the same position in 15 years with no options off the table, except some have argued the economy of Iran will be fortified, that they'll be able to withstand sanctions in an enhanced way, and that the ability to reassemble this international coalition will be very difficult as countries will be doing business and re-engaging with Iran. Do you agree with that assessment, and do you just conclude that that's a sensible trade-off, as some have suggested? Third, you concluded, Mr. Secretary, that this agreement makes the world, our allies, including Israel, and the region safer. And I have no doubt that you have concluded that that is correct based on your best assessment. If you would just probe or provide for us kind of some thinking of why it is that the current Israeli leadership does not see it that way, as they are obviously sort of have come to a different conclusion. Why do you think that is? 4, after 15 years, Iran, most have suggested, is a nuclear threshold state, but that they must negotiate comprehensive safeguards, again, with the IAEA. And whether or not, I know there's been some discussion, have you seen those? But do we have some ability to influence what that agreement is? Do we have any ability to influence its content or to monitor their compliance going forward? That is between Iran and the IAEA. 5th, is the likelihood of an international consensus remaining if the deal is rejected? What happens if the deal is rejected? Some have suggested, actually, some top-level Israeli officials have suggested Iran will comply with the terms of the agreement, will get relief from our other partners, and the U.S. will be isolated. Others have suggested that Iran will rush toward the development of a nuclear weapon with no constraints. Is there any reason to believe that Iran would comply with the deal, the terms of the deal, if it's rejected, as some have suggested, and not proceed quickly to a nuclear weapon? If the weapons, 6th, if weapons are transferred to Hezbollah during the 5-year period, which is a violation of the UN resolution, but also a violation of the interim agreement, would that constitute a violation and cause snapback in these intervening 5 years if arms are sold to Hezbollah? And finally, what will happen to the UN security resolution, specifically the lifting of the arms embargo and the ICBM provisions, if Congress does not approve the agreement? Do those remain intact? And the last question, Secretary Lew, is for you. The JCPOA describes a process in which non-compliance with the agreement may result in sanctions snapping back at the UN, but this process will likely only work in the case of major violations of the agreement. How will the administration treat minor violations? And I invite you to maybe start with you, Secretary Lew, but the ones that you obviously can't get to, I very much appreciate your answers, and thank you for the work that you've done, gentlemen.
Well, thanks, Congressman. I'll start with the snapback question. We have reserved the right to snap back in whole or in part. Obviously, if there's some small technical violation, that will not bring back the whole sanctions regime. I think that the goal would be to get them back into compliance. If there's a need to make it clear that violations that are small will get a response, we have the option of putting some of the smaller sanctions back into place. If there's a major violation, we have the option of putting in force all of our unilateral sanctions and ultimately going back to the UN for the international sanctions as well. We have all the authority we need to do that.
Matt Salmon of Arizona.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, you said no country would accept anytime, anywhere inspections, but I'd submit that Iran is not a normal country. In fact, Iran is a terrorist state under heavy international sanctions. It's neither got the moral nor the geopolitical equal of the United States or our negotiating partners, and I think we have to stop treating it like one. It aspires to be a regional power. The U.S. right now is the only world superpower, and my question is this really the best deal that we could get, given the fact that we seem to have most of the cards, and we have had most of the cards since these sanctions were imposed? Secretary Moniz, you say the deal includes any time, anywhere, in the sense of a well-defined process and a well-defined end date. But all that depends on Iran acting in good faith. We shouldn't make the assumption, because Iran's been stonewalling the IAEA on the military dimensions while claiming to cooperate for years. They're doing that as we speak. First, the process is not just 24 days. If Iran balks, it's a minimum of 24 days. Before the clock even starts, the IAEA has to tell Iran its concerns about a particular site, and Iran then is supposed to provide an explanation. But there's no time limit. Does anyone believe that Iran will respond immediately, or the back and forth discussions or negotiations won't take place? Only after these delays and the high barriers are taken care of, at best, maybe can the IAEA make a formal request and start the 24-day clock. But at the end of the 24 days, there's no punishment if Iran says no. Instead, the matter goes to the dispute resolution mechanism, which has lots of opportunity for delay and more barriers. Does anybody believe that the P5+1, not this administration and certainly not the Europeans, will derail the entire agreement by imposing sanctions and restarting Iran's nuclear program just because Iran is denying access to one sensitive site? More likely, there'll be overwhelming pressure for a compromise, one that's no more substantive than what's in the final agreement. Kicking the can down the road is always one option. It's worked in Iran for years. I think all this led CIA former Director Michael Hayden to warn in front of this committee that the deal has taken inspections from the technical level and put it at the political level. And I just think that's a formula for chaos, obfuscation, ambiguity, and doubt. My question, besides the fact that I think that on the 24 days, we're kidding ourselves if we think that the 24 days is the total length of the deal. I think that it could be much, much longer. And I'd like to know how ultimately we're going to deal once we do find infractions. My second question is, of all the sanctions to be lifted in the Iran nuclear agreement, few are more significant than those against a shadowy $100 billion network of foundations belonging to the Islamic Republic's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. The U.S. delisting the headquarters for the execution of Imam Khomeini's order, also known as ICO, will pump tens of billions of dollars into the supreme leader's personal coffers, helping him secure his grip on the Iranian people and bolstering Iran's ability to promote its agenda abroad. In fact, it's estimated he will gain access to as much as $95 billion. The U.S. Treasury designated ICO and 37 subsidiaries in June 2013, noting its purpose is to generate and control massive off-the-books investments shielded from the view of the Iranian people and international regulators. Secretary Kerry, please explain why ICO will be designated.
Well, Congressman, I'm going to turn to Bernie for the first part of it because it's important to understand these 24 days. You are, I say respectfully, misreading how the 24 days. By the way, the 24 days is an outside period of time. It could be less than that. It's very possible it could be in 18 days or something. But Bernie, why don't you discuss that?
Well, first you started out with this question of Iran being unique in terms of verification. That's exactly why we have a verification system in this agreement that is unparalleled. This goes beyond what anyone else has accepted, exactly because of the distrust of Iran built up from previous behavior. With regard to the 24 days, first of all, the IAEA can cut that off any time by declaring their request for access, and then the 24-day clock runs. It is not the beginning of dispute resolution. It is the end of dispute resolution. And in fact, at that point, they are in material breach. Now, you asked about would there be a response if it was, quotes, only one site. Well, I'm going to turn it over now to my colleagues, but I want to emphasize that in the snapback, it says in whole or in part, so a graded response is possible.
We're going to go to Mr. Alan Grayson of Florida.
Mr. Secretary, I have 5 minutes. I have 10 short questions. I'm hoping for 10 short answers. Will implementation of the agreement increase Iran's support for terrorism?
You want these
Yes.
sequentially? We have no way to know. I presume in some places, possibly, only in the sense that they are committed to certain things that we interpret as terrorism. They don't, and we're going to continue to conflict on those issues.
All right. If the agreement is implemented, will Iran, in fact, allow inspections at all of its military sites?
Well, they have to. If they don't, they are in material breach of the agreement, and we will snap back the sanctions or take other action if necessary.
If the agreement is implemented, do you suspect that, or do you think that there's a significant risk that Iran will cheat on the agreement and develop a nuclear weapon secretly?
I don't think they're able to develop a nuclear weapon secretly because our intelligence community tells us with the regime that we have established here, it is physically impossible for them to create an entirely covert secondary fuel cycle. And we have a sufficient intrusive inspection mechanism and capacity on their fuel cycle that they can't do it. You can't make a bomb at 3.67% enrichment for 15 years. You can't make a bomb with 300 kilograms of a stockpile for 15 years. You can't make a bomb if you can't go enrich and move forward without our knowing it. And we have submitted, and we believe with clarity, that we will know what they are doing before they can do that.
If an agreement is implemented, is there a significant risk that Iran will adhere to it for a year, let's say, then pocket the $50 billion and then violate the agreement and go ahead and build a bomb?
They can't do that because the red flags that would go off, the bells and whistles that would start chiming as a result of any movement away from what they have to do. They have to live for 15 years under this extraordinary constraint of a limitation on the number of centrifuges that can spin, on a limitation in their R&D, on 24/7 inspections, on day-to-day accountability with live television with respect to their centrifuge production, and so forth. So it is not possible for them during that period, in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, to sort of make this decision and stiff us. And if they did, in some way, if they just radically said, you know, we're going to change this whole deal and we're breaking out of here, then we have snapback of all the sanctions with the full support of the international community, which would then be absolutely in agreement that they have to do it, and we have the military option if that was necessary.
But briefly with a follow-up, isn't it true in that scenario that they would then have $50 billion in their pocket they wouldn't otherwise have?
No, I doubt that after 1 or 2 years that they would. They've had investments in their economy and they'd be moving. But you have to, you have to look at this in a real world. Here they are trying to attract investment from France, Germany, China, Russia, Britain, all kinds of countries. Is it your presumption that a country that has destroyed its stockpile, reduced its centrifuges by 2/3, put concrete in its calandria, totally stripped the ability to do fissile material at Fordow, that country, and is now seeking investment and trying to build its economy with a population of 50% of the country under the age of 30 who want jobs and a future? Is it your presumption that they're just going to throw this all to the wind and go create a nuclear weapon after saying we'll strip our program down and won't? I don't think it's going to happen.
What about after 15 years? If the agreement is implemented, is Iran in fact likely to build a nuclear weapon after 15 years at the end of the deal?
All I can say to you is that they can't do it without our knowing what they're doing, because after 15 years, they have to live by the additional protocol. They have to live by the modified code 3.1. They have to live with inspectors. 150 additional inspectors are going to be going into Iran as a consequence of this agreement. And those inspectors are going to be given 24/7 access to declared facilities. So if Iran suddenly starts to enrich more, which we will know, all the bells and whistles go off. The international community would be all over that with questions and restraints.
All right, my time is almost up, and I want to ask you this.
May I just mention that this is the agreement that codifies a permanent ban on nuclear weapons in Iran, and we have to take the...
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I do want to ask this one additional question, and I had 4 more, but that's the way it goes. Tell me exactly what you expect will happen if the agreement is rejected. Specifically, there's been some suggestion that Iran will adhere to it anyway, and sanctions will remain in place anyway if the agreement is rejected. Explain to me what you expect.
I actually heard that for the first time last night when I met with an Israeli friend who suggested that might be possible. It's physically impossible.
Explain why, please.
Well, I'll tell you why. Because in the legislation that you have passed, in which you've given yourself the ability to vote, you've also put in an inability for the president to waive the sanctions. So there will be no waiving of the sanctions. So there's no way for the deal to work because our lifting of sanctions is critical to the ability of other countries to invest and work, and critical, obviously, for Iran to get any money. So nothing works for them unless this deal is accepted.
We have a lot of members who still want to ask questions. We need to go to Tom Marino of Pennsylvania.
Mr. Secretary of State, we all know what Iran has done as far as giving weapons to terrorists to do Iran's dirty work. And what will stop Iran from giving nuclear material or even more weapons to terrorist organizations? And how is a nuclear Iran going to make the world and the United States a safer place? And more particular, how is a nuclear Iran going to make American citizens feel safer?
Well, the opposite of your question is to suggest that somehow you or we can prevent them from having any nuclear program at all.
Okay.
Now, you all have a responsibility to show us how that's going to happen.
I'm going to show you how
President
that's going to
George
happen.
Bush,
I'm going to show you right now how that's going to happen,
President
Mr.
George
Secretary.
Bush.
You've answered my question. I'm going to show you how that's going to happen. I'm going to take Secretary Lew's words. The sanctions have crippled Iran. If we ratchet them up and get our allies to ratchet those sanctions up, you can bring Iran to its knees where it cannot financially function. That's how to do it, because it's proved that it's been done.
Let me just tell you,
Please.
I really suggest very respectfully that you go spend some time with the intel community. Ask the people who've spent a lifetime following Iran very closely whether or not they agree with your judgment that an increase in sanctions will in fact bring Iran to its knees. They do not. They do not believe there is a capitulation theory here. And you will not sanction Iran out of its commitment to what it has a right to. Iran is an NPT country. There are 189 of them.
And we have a right to protect the American citizens from this disaster, this country having nuclear power. And sanctions have worked. Are you going to retract any statements made by Secretary Lew and anyone else that says it has crippled them? It'll take years for them to get surfacing again?
Congressman, if you're going to quote me, let me speak for myself.
No, I quoted exactly what you said. It crippled Iran, and it will take them years to recover. So if we up
the sanctions, the other part of what I said, Congressman, is that the reason it was crippling is that we had international cooperation. We have worked very hard to get that international cooperation. The parties that we worked with reached an agreement here.
Look who we worked with. We worked with China. We worked with Russia, the people who want Iran to be in that position because it jeopardizes the United States.
The power of our sanctions is not going to have the effect
I disagree with you.
That we want.
The economists disagree with you. Individuals that I've read article after article on disagree with you.
But Congressman, as we have said again and again, and I want to repeat it now, we are absolutely committed that Iran will never get the material for one bomb. Not for one bomb.
Okay, but you didn't answer my original question, Mr. Secretary. My original question is, how is that going to make the United States citizens safer?
Let me tell you. I'll tell you exactly how it makes the United States citizens safer. Because if Iran fully implements the agreement that we have come to, Iran will not be able to make a nuclear weapon. And we have created an agreement which has sufficient level of intrusive inspection and verification that we are confident in our ability to be able to deliver on preventing them from having enough fissile material for the one bomb. Now, mind you, we've started in a place where they already had enough fissile material for 10 to 12 bombs. We've already rolled that back. And that made America safer. By the way, it also made Israel and our friends and allies in the region safer. Everything that we have done thus far in the interim agreement, which has been in force for 2 years, has made the world safer.
Okay, sir, I'm going to reclaim my time because I know you're repeating statements that you've made. I understand this, but I have 40 seconds.
If you kill this deal,
I hope that you are right.
Not making America
I hope
safer.
you are right, because if not, the executive branch in Congress is going to have a disaster on our hands. And we need to be accountable to the American people. 32 seconds, I want to ask an important question. Secretary Kerry, this is an extremely important topic for the future of this country's security and the safety of the American people, as well as our allies in the Middle East. I first want to ask you a simple yes or no question. In accordance with the Office of Management and Budget, as well as the National Archives and Records Administration directives, along with State Department policy, have you ever used a non-government and personal email account to conduct official business?
No, I conduct my business on on a government account.
We need to go to Dr. Ami Bera of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the witnesses. I'm going to go through a series of questions as I try to make my decision with regards to this deal. Secretary Kerry, in multiple times you've said this negotiation had one objective, to make sure they cannot get a nuclear weapon. Secretary Moniz, you're the expert here. Would you, in your opinion, do you believe this deal makes it less likely within the next decade, next 15 years, over a lifetime, for Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon?
Far less likely.
Okay, great. I don't trust Iran. Secretary Kerry, you said multiple times there's nothing in this agreement that is based on trust. Secretary Lew, you said there will be no immediate sanctions relief. Is that an accurate statement?
Sanctions relief will only come after Iran complies with all of the measures to stop their nuclear program.
And in your estimation, is there enough in the verification regime in this deal that will allow us to?
I would defer to Secretary Moniz, but I have been persuaded by everything I've read and seen that it is the toughest verification regime we've ever had.
Yes.
Is that correct? And Secretary Lew, there is no signing bonus.
There is no signing bonus.
Okay, great. Moving on then, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter is not here, but I'll direct this to Secretary Kerry. In your opinion, would you say that Secretary Carter, as well as our Joint Chiefs, are satisfied with the ICBM provision of no missiles for 8 years, as well as the arms embargo for 5 years, as the best, that they would be okay with that provision? Okay. Moving on, Secretary Kerry, you've pointed out in your time and history in the Senate, you're a very strong defender of Israel and had a strong record of support of Israel. In your opinion, do you believe this deal makes Israel safer or less safe?
I am absolutely convinced beyond any doubt this deal makes Israel safer, and the region, and the world.
And would you say that President Obama shares that opinion?
Yes.
Okay. Secretary Moniz, we've talked a lot about the 24-hour framework. Is it accurate that you believe, as an expert here, that within that 24-hour framework, we will be able to detect any activities, nuclear activities, et cetera?
For the 24-day, for the 24-day access to undeclared sites, work with nuclear material, I feel quite confident we can detect, yes.
That there will be no cheating, that we will be able to detect if within that 24-day period.
I want to emphasize work with nuclear materials. Other work, non-nuclear work, might be a little more difficult.
Okay, great. Secretary Lew, if in fact there's no nuclear activity going on and Iran is complying with the terms of this deal, I do have serious reservations that they will continue to fund terror groups, fund organizations that destabilize the region. And that is worrisome, obviously. In your opinion, do you believe that if we acted in a unilateral manner to impose new sanctions or reimpose existing sanctions, not based on breaking the nuclear deal, but based on other activities, that we would be able to impose sanctions strong enough that they're felt in Iran?
Congressman, we totally agree that their actions on terrorism and regional destabilization are and continue to be an area of concern. We have been putting sanctions in place. We have reserved the right to put even parties who are delisted on the list again if, in fact, they're violating terrorism or regional destabilization provisions. I think that we have powerful tools. I think that the world knows we mean to use them. And I believe that our credibility in doing it has to be for real. It has to be that we're listing people for reasons of terrorism and regional destabilization.
And you feel we have the tools, if we have to do this unilaterally, to make it felt?
We definitely have powerful tools.
Okay, great. I will actually yield back the remainder of my time. Since
Thank you. We'll go to Jeff Duncan of South Carolina.
Thank you. Secretary Kerry, there are still 3 or 4 Americans in prison in Iran. I put their pictures here to remind you of them today. I understand not using them as pawns in negotiations, but what should have happened is they should have been released as a precondition before ever sitting down with Iran for anything. And with that, I yield to Mr. DeSantis from Florida.
I thank the gentleman from South Carolina. Secretary Kerry, for these side agreements between the IAEA and Iran, can you at least confirm that one of the agreements is about the Parchin military site, the other one's about the possible military dimensions of Iran's nuclear program?
I believe there's just one basic agreement which contains the approach to the PMD.
So can you confirm that the Congress will not...
I'm advised I think he's been more brief than I am, but there are 2 appendices, apparently.
2 appendices. And is it your testimony that the Congress will not get to review those agreements before voting on...
No, Congress will be briefed on the contents of those agreements per what we know.
But we will not be given the actual agreements to review,
I don't believe
correct?
we get the actual agreement, Congress.
The problem with that, though, is that the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act that the Congress passed and that President Obama signed required the executive branch to provide Congress with all documents and specifically defined all documents to include any side agreements. So the executive branch has a binding legal obligation under the Iran Nuclear Review Act to provide all documents, including side deals.
We don't have a side agreement, so we are in compliance.
Doesn't matter. The agreement.
The IAEA is an independent UN agency, and it makes an independent agreement under standard procedures with a
And the Nuclear Review Act, with all due respect, applies to any agreement that Iran may have with any other parties. Any related agreements, whether entered into or implemented prior to the agreement or to be entered into or implemented in the future. So if there's an agreement between Iran and the IAEA under the Iran Nuclear Agreement Act, that needs to be provided to Congress. And so if you're not in compliance with that act, how has the clock even started to run for the 60-day review period?
Congressman, I'm not sure legally that the Congress of the United States has the powerful as it is, to be able to dictate to the IAEA a change in its procedure.
That's not what we're doing. We passed the bill, the president signed it. It laid out the conditions before we would then have
the
clock
agreement.
Started.
We don't have the agreement.
And you're not going to request the agreement and bring it to so that we can review it?
Congressman, we don't possess the agreement.
These are protocols worked out to satisfy the IAEA-Iran agreement on resolving the PMD
Which are very important issues, because we need to know the PMD. We need to know more about Parchin if we want to be able to evaluate the efficacy of the agreement that you guys have negotiated.
The IAEA will then be providing its report on December the 15th, which summarizes all that they have found.
Which is after the window that Congress has to review the agreement. So we're not going to be privy to that information, and we're going to be asked to cast a vote on this. Let me ask you this, Secretary Kerry. You had alluded to in previous questioning about the ability that if Iran cheats, we can snap back the sanctions. The problem, though, that I see is that in the agreement itself, it says Iran has stated that if sanctions are reinstated in whole or in part, Iran will treat that as grounds to cease performing its commitments under the JCPOA in whole or in part. So if you have a situation where Iran is doing incremental cheating, and then there's a movement to then have the sanctions reimposed, if you do that, Iran is saying, well, okay, it's going to walk away from its commitments. And so for me, it's structured in a way to allow Iran to get away with small violations, because the cost of going to actually impose the sanctions would be to blow up the deal that you guys have spent so much time negotiating.
Congressman, with all respect, that's a misread of the paragraph and a misread of what we have here. The paragraph was requested by Iran because they were afraid, because Congress kept rattling its saber about more sanctions. And so they said, well, what guarantee do we have if we agree to this that Congress isn't going to pass more sanctions on the same thing? Or, excuse me, not more. Just take the sanctions they had and bring them back after we made an agreement. So that paragraph merely says that we agree that we're not just going to reimpose the same sanctions and put them back. It does not, as Secretary Lew has said, prevent us from bringing any other additional or appropriate sanctions for other things. And the sanctions language also says in whole or in part. So we are allowed for any minor infraction. We're not facing this draconian choice of bringing the whole thing and risking the whole deal, we could bring a small amount. Also remember, the reason Iran is coming to the table to make this agreement is they want the relief from the sanctions. And if indeed they were in flagrant violation, all of our friends who helped negotiate this are going to be standing with us, all in agreement that we have to put the sanctions back.
We must go to
That's
Grace
the
Ming
imperative
of New
that
York.
generates the behavior from Iran.
Grace.
Thank you to all of you for being here, for your time and dedication to this important issue, and for spending so much time with us here in Congress on the Hill to discuss so many of our concerns. I want to ask, during the negotiations, did this law of the land, the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, signed by President Obama and known to all parties of the negotiation, was it known to all the parties? And
well, obviously the other parties became very aware of the fact that Congress was requiring a review period, and they were very concerned about it.
And so I want to bring up one example of during the Cold War, Congress played a very important role in the development of non-proliferation agreements dealing with nuclear weapons, specifically the Threshold Test Ban Treaty, which I know was a treaty, but we also have our law here. This treaty was initially blocked by the Senate because of concerns over Soviet compliance. The treaty was not submitted to the Senate for approval for 2 years after signing and wasn't ratified until after the U.S. and Soviet Union reached agreement 14 years later on additional provisions to enhance America's ability to verify Soviet compliance. So this all leads me to believe that Congress should be, and we are, and we have the ability and authority to compel a better deal should it choose to disapprove of this one. What are the key differences between the JCPOA here and the Cold War examples, other than the fact that it was a treaty and there were multiple parties?
Well, one of the principal differences is that we have not had any engagement or any dialogue with Iran since 1979. And the lack of diplomatic relations even, which is different from what we had with the Soviet Union, makes this a very, very complicated situation. So you have to take and analyze what is achievable here in the context of the threat, the nuclear program. And I believe, given the nature of the political system in Iran, the challenges with respect to their own politics, the notion that we're going to be able to go back to the table is just it's a fantasy. There is no latitude here, because Iran came to this table with enormous suspicions about even engaging with the United States. There was a huge debate in the country about whether or not they should, whether or not we could be trusted, whether or not they thought this was worth the risk. And many people in the country suggested that we would not act in good faith. If indeed, all of a sudden, we stand up in Vienna, 7 nations strong, embrace an agreement, the United Nations has supported the agreement, and we turn around and say, we're not going to perform, I think the intelligence community will confirm to you resoundingly, we will not be back at the table, certainly in the near future, and I would think certainly not with this Iranian government or leadership.
One final question. You've also obviously asserted that if Congress does disapprove, the international sanctions regime will fall apart and Iran goes back to 2 months breakout time. I understand that Russia and China's top priority and interests may not be the views of Congress here in the U.S., but if you can help me understand what is the basis for the view that these 2 countries would also just allow Iran to fully violate the deal, why wouldn't they hold Iran to their nuclear commitments set forth in the agreement? And if they allow them to do that, then why do we also believe that they will be there with us in any sort of snapback scenario?
Well, I think that Russia and China are very, very serious about the non-proliferation component of this. as serious as we are. Russia has agreed to export the spent fuel and process it in Russia in order to help make this work. China has accepted major responsibility to be the lead entity with our co-chairmanship on a committee that will work to redesign the Iraq reactor in a way that is acceptable to all of us. And they've taken on major responsibility. So they both have a huge interest in the non-proliferation piece of this, but they both believe that the other components of the resolution with respect to the arms and missiles was thrown in as an add-on, as punishment in effect, not because it referred directly to the nuclear part of this of the resolution or agreement. The resolution of the UN was a nuclear agreement, and in that regard, I think they would have serious reservations. They did express serious reservations about continuing.
We'll go to Darrell Issa of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'd be careful when I say Mr. Secretary. But Secretary Lew, let's start with you. Were the sanctions, or are the sanctions that are in place as of today, effectively curtailing both the money flow and the economy of Iran in a way that has brought them to the table?
Congressman, I think that the sanctions have been very effective at slowing the rate of growth in Iran's economy, at making inflation high, unemployment high, and the exchange rate on their currency very unfavorable. I don't think it stopped them from doing a lot of other bad things around the world, and they've maintained, even in a very difficult set of fiscal challenges, malign activities, which we have to stay focused on stopping, even if we have a nuclear agreement.
Okay, the question, though, Mr. Secretary, was did it bring them to the table? Or did they come out of just goodwill?
No, I believe that the sanctions brought them to the table, and the sanctions were, in fact, designed to bring them to the table.
Secretary Kerry, you'd agree with that?
I do agree. I think sanctions and other strategic designs, but I think essentially the sanctions are what crystallized their timing.
And when I look at the sanctions that will be lifted under this agreement, I looked at, in the classified annex, but it wasn't the classified portion of it, a long list of ships and aircraft and banks that will receive the relief under this. I'm sure you're both familiar with those 20, 30 pages. The question I really have here, because I think we're all focusing on the nuclear deal, but I want to focus on Iran, an exporter of terrorism, a killer directly and indirectly of Americans, a kidnapper indirectly and directly of Americans since 1979. All of those sanctions that we're agreeing to lift, is there anyone that doesn't think that those sanctions and more are appropriate as long as they continue to export terrorism, kill Americans and others, and destabilize not one, not two, not three, but at least 5 countries throughout the Middle East? I'll start with Secretary Lew from a standpoint of those tools that we're lifting, those 40 pages or whatever, single-spaced, a huge amount of things that will now be able to carry oil, move money, and so on. Those are, most of them, equally effective in deterring or slowing their ability to export terrorism, aren't they?
Congressman, as a class, we are listing for relief from sanctions entities and individuals who were violating the nuclear
right, but
provisions.
but those entities are banks in many cases.
Well, so a bank that was designated as a nuclear violator stays on. So Bank Saderat stays on the list. If there are institutions that are delisted that are relisted subsequently under other authorities that deal with terrorism, we have every right to do that. But I think that the delisting of nuclear parties is what you would expect if there's a nuclear agreement. The nuclear sanctions would go away, but other sanctions stay in place.
And they can be, again, Congressman, I want to emphasize that we share with everybody the concern about Iran's behavior within the region, and we have the ability to bring sanctions with respect to that behavior as we go forward.
Well, let me just give you a hypothetical, and it's not a hypothetical without some thought. What if, at the same time as we don't reject this plan, we bring you a package of new sanctions? What if, in fact, Congress determines that the only way we can accept this this risk is if we can truly essentially snap back now relative to their promise? Just the day after you signed this, they promised to destabilize Bahrain, to continue what they're doing in Yemen. Obviously, their support for Hezbollah and Hamas, their support for the Assad regime, and the taking of both Lebanon and Syria. So with that real threat, with that goal, with that continued activity, is there any reason that we should not either reject this agreement or include further sanctions in order to keep them from expanding their support for the murder of Americans and our allies around the world and the destabilizing of the Middle East, one that is leading to an arms race?
Congressman, we have powerful tools to snap back sanctions.
Now, not snap back. I'm saying today. Today they are, in fact, doing all of this. What would you say about the fact that we should be doing it? Well,
the gentleman would suspend. We need to go to
I just wanted him to answer the
Florida
question I asked.
simply because these junior members do not have sufficient time. And so, Lois, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. I just some quick follow-up questions and then some new ones. If there is if new enrichment sites are detected under that 24-day rule, will those sites then become under a constant inspection?
If a new site emerges in this?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. And could you tell me how many countries other than the P5+1 are currently engaged in sanctions? And how long would you say did it take to have all these sanctions in place to get Iran to the table?
Congressman, I'd have to go and check the number, but our sanctions and international sanctions are being honored around the world. So it's many, many countries. And it's taken us years to put that regime in place. And I'd have to underscore really 2 points. One is our unilateral sanctions are powerful, but the ability for them to really have an effect still requires cooperation. And the international sanctions wouldn't exist without cooperation. We've spent a lot of effort with countries for whom it is at substantial economic cost. They have cooperated to try and stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
So how would a snapback affect all those countries? It concerns me how you could actually get the snapback.
So I think, as Secretary Kerry said earlier, there is enormous unity in the goal of keeping Iran from getting nuclear weapons. If they violate the agreement, if, in fact, a snapback is warranted because of nuclear issues, I think that both the international and the U.S. unilateral sanctions would, in fact, snap back. We are going to continue to prosecute our unilateral sanctions on things like terrorism, on things like regional destabilization, and human rights. But they're obviously different regimes.
Once Congress, if we don't disapprove this agreement, if it goes forward, will the Congress, U.S. Congress, have any further role in this agreement, number one? Number two, can any president alter this agreement or refuse to abide by it in the future?
Well, Congress will always have a role, obviously, and you've made that crystal clear in the context of what we're doing here now. So, yes, I mean, there will be an ongoing role with respect to the enforcement, the implementation, our
Will we have to vote on anything?
Afterwards?
To repeal sanctions or any, I mean.
Ultimately, yes. Ultimately, there are the Iran Sanctions Act itself. There's the lifting of sanctions. Ultimately, you would have to vote.
And if we don't do that pursuant to the agreement, are there any penalties on our part?
Actually, we're then, Iran is free to break the agreement because we will have broken it, and then all bets are off in terms of compliance.
Can a future president refuse to abide by the agreement?
Absolutely. A future president can, but it's our judgment that if this agreement is fully implemented and is working well, no future president is going to choose to do that because of the implications. If this is working, it's achieving our goal of not having a nuclear weapon in Iran.
And just to be clear, the actual repeal of sanctions would be way down the road. It's not something that happens in the next year or two. It's many, many years in the future, probably 8 or more years.
I want to get again to this the troubling issue of the inspections. Are you saying that there is no limit to inspections by the IAEA, that it will go on forever? Did you say
what
that?
I'm saying is there's a process, Congresswoman.
Excuse me, and who pays for that?
Well, it's paid for. We pay a certain element of the budget. It's a UN agency. We represent a certain percentage of that budget, about 25%, and others contribute to it. We actually train all the inspectors. That's one thing that we do and do very effectively. But it's an independent entity.
But excuse me, is it this separate secret agreement that we don't see that's going to allow this continuation of inspections? That's not clear.
That is the continuation of inspections is under what is called the additional protocol, and the additional protocol is exactly that. It's an add.
That's what we don't get to see.
Yes, no, you can see, absolutely. You see that. You can read every component of it. And I was sharing some thoughts with the committee earlier about the things that it empowers the IAEA to do. The kind of accountability is very in-depth and significant. That's what I was trying to point out. This is not some light set of requirements.
We'll go to Mr. Mo Brooks of Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kerry, my questions require brief answers to comply with my 5-minute time limitation, and I hope you will cooperate in that context. 3 months ago, Iranian Brigadier General Mohammad Raza Naqvi stated that erasing Israel off the map is non-negotiable. Do you believe his comments accurately reflect Iranian government goals? Yes, no, or I don't know?
I think it accurately reflects some people's rhetoric and some people's attitude, but
in the Iranian government,
I don't think it's possible for Iran to do that. And I think Israel has enormous capacity, obviously.
Okay, I didn't ask for all that other. I'm just asking if you have a judgment as to whether his
My judgment is it is not
Iran's government's goals.
It is not an implementable policy by Iran.
Okay. Well, less than 2 weeks ago, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei led a rally that was frequently punctuated by chants of death to America and death to Israel. Do you believe his comments accurately reflect Iranian government goals? Again, yes, no, or I don't know.
I think they reflect an attitude and a rhetorical excess, but I see no evidence that they have a policy that is implementing that against us at this point in time.
Well, do you believe that Iran is the world's foremost sponsor of terrorism?
Yes.
And that they will use the conventional weapons made available by the Iran nuclear treaty to kill Americans or Israelis?
Well, they may, and we have, as you know, responded to that from 1979 when they took over our embassy forward. We have put sanctions in place specifically because of their support for terror, because of their abuse.
Okay, I understand that. You've answered my question when you said yes, they may. Next, is the Obama administration willing to use military force to prevent Iran from obtaining, building, testing, or using nuclear weapons?
Yes.
And what has Iran done in the past couple of years that causes you to believe Iran will abide by the Iran nuclear treaty, or that Iran wants to become a responsible member of the international community?
The only thing that indicates to us a willingness to try to comply with this agreement is the fact that they have complied fully with the interim agreement for the last 2 years, and that we have put in place such a strict set of consequences that it is deeply in their interest to comply if they have reduced 2/3 of their centrifuges, stripped their stockpile, put concrete in the calandria of Arak, emptied out Fordow. There's a lot of incentive, therefore, to fully comply with this agreement.
Okay, that focuses to a large degree on the nuclear side. What about the use of the conventional weapons and whether they will maintain their status as the world's foremost sponsor
We
of
have
terrorism?
serious concerns, which is precisely why we are engaged with our friends in the region. It's why I will be in Doha in a few days to meet with them as we lay out the plans for pushing back against those activities. We will be engaging in special forces training, counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, counterfinance, a whole series of steps in order to empower all of us to do a better job of reducing those activities.
September 11th, 14 years ago, proves Muslim fundamentalists are very willing to sacrifice their own lives in furtherance of their desire to kill non-Muslims and other foes. Given the religious zealotry of the Iranian government, How confident are you that Iran will not use nuclear weapons to further death to America or death to Israel if Iran obtains nuclear weapons?
Well, they won't obtain a nuclear weapon. And I'm confident that under this agreement and with President Obama's commitment, they're not going to secure a nuclear weapon.
And is that in part because of your statement that this administration is willing to use whatever means are necessary of a military nature to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons?
That is certainly the final backup to it, but I believe all of the elements of this agreement will, if it's implemented fully, again, if it's implemented, will prevent them from even getting near that possibility.
On occasion, you've used the phrase, all options are on the table. Do those options to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons include the use of nuclear weapons by the United States?
I've never asked. I've never asked. I mean, I know of no president of the United States who ever taken all military options available to him off the table. But I also don't know of any realistic situation in which that would present a very feasible strategy, given the proximity of great friends of ours to Iran and the consequences of that. But I don't think the president has taken any. There's no option that's ever been discussed that's been taken off.
So when you talk about the use of military force, is it fair to infer that we're really talking solely about conventional weaponry?
What the president has laid out is and what the military has designed is an approach, and I'm not going to discuss that plan in open session here, but a plan that sufficiently meets the task of preventing them from having a nuclear weapon. That's the goal. That's the objective. And our current set of options accomplish that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Joaquin Castro of Texas.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your work and diplomacy on behalf of the nation. I want to imagine for a moment another scenario, a scenario where we don't take a deal, we walk away from it, and there is military action against Iran. Can you imagine for me for a moment what would the fallout be from a destabilized Iran? We've seen other nations, Libya, Iraq, Egypt, where there have been destabilized regimes, secular leaders who have been replaced by fundamentalists, and terrorism that has now been franchised almost across the world. What would happen if Iran was destabilized in the same way?
You know, Congressman, it's very hard for me to get into the speculative game here, and there's too much talk about sort of military option, this and that, when we have in front of us a plan that accomplishes the task of preventing Iran from achieving a nuclear weapon, which they say they don't want to do anyway, and have made very strong averments about their commitment not to do. It seems that to be focused on the destabilized side of it and the military side of it is not the right focus. The right focus is on this agreement that accomplishes the goal of preventing them from having a weapon. Now, the region is obviously destabilized and in flames, and that's another reason why I think we should think really carefully about the consequences of turning away from this deal.
Well, and I guess let me point out, Secretary Kerry, that, so that I'm not coy here, I am inclined to support the deal. One of the questions I have, though, is I think a concern is that we find out that they are cheating, and at that point, a decision has to be made if we're going to hold true to our position, which is we're not going to let them have a nuclear weapon.
But that's, frankly, Congressman, that's the easiest decision in the world for this president and for all of us here.
Well, but here's my question, Secretary. What is the tipping point where sanctions will no longer work and you have to take military action if, in fact, you're going to keep them from not having that weapon?
The tipping point is a clarity with respect to what effort is being put into breaking out, if that's the choice they've made, and where they are in that process. The tipping point is how much time you make a judgment that you have with respect to where they're starting and where they can wind up. But we are convinced that with the depth of accountability and verification that is built into this agreement, we will have enormous tip-off to that. That's why a year was built into this agreement for the first 10 years. And even after that, there is a lengthy enough period of time that our interest, the interests of the region, our friends, Israel, others, is protected. And we're confident about our ability to have accountability in that process going forward. But I would say to everybody, if this is rejected, then you have no inspections, you don't have a regime in place, you don't have the sanctions. Iran may undertake, not immediately, but they've certainly indicated they would consider themselves free to do so. And as they do it, what are the options that are then available to us? It seems to me when you compare those two scenarios, this becomes not that complicated a choice.
And then my final question is, to put this in context, can you go over again, I missed some of the discussion, but can you go over again the deal that was offered in 2003 by the Bush administration?
In 2008 is when it was offered.
2008,
in
I'm sorry.
2003, there was discussion. There were about 163 centrifuges. But the P5+1, the same P5+1, made an offer to Iran for their suspension of enrichment and reprocessing that the United States and the P5+1, excuse me, would then recognize Iran's right to nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, treat Iran's nuclear program in the same manner as that of any non-nuclear weapons state party to the NPT once confidence had been built, provide technical and financial assistance for peaceful nuclear energy, including state-of-the-art power reactors, support for R&D, and legally binding fuel supply guarantees, improve relations with Iran and support Iran in playing an important and constructive role in international affairs, work with Iran and others in the region on confidence-building measures and regional security, reaffirmation of the obligation to refrain from the threat or use of force, cooperation on Afghanistan, steps towards normalization of trade and economic relations, and it goes on. All of these things were offered in exchange for suspending enrichment and so forth. Now, they didn't suspend. They went up to 19,000 centrifuges. And that fact is one of the driving factors in our coming to the conclusion, the President coming to the conclusion, that we needed to arrive at an agreement which recognized their ability to have nuclear power under a safeguards agreement, under the NPT, with our ability to know what they are doing.
Randy Weber of Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Kerry. Appreciate you being here. I hope that you said that we're going to be briefed on that side agreement that the IAEA has with Iran. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Well, I want to implore you to use your power to make sure that we're not briefed by the same staff that briefed Susan Rice and Hillary Clinton on Benghazi or Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. Okay? Make sure that we get a decent briefing there. Mr. Kerry, you say frequently that this is the strongest negotiation that you could get. You feel like it was. The president said he would walk away from a bad deal. And I would submit this. Now, you come to us and you say there's not 535 secretaries of state, and that other countries won't appreciate that Congress is weighing in. But if you were going to get a strong deal, I have said from the get-go, I think there's a lot of stronger position you should have taken. So I'm going to lay out some preclusions, and you tell me if you operated from that basis. Number one, I agree with Senator Jeff Duncan over here when he said the American hostages should have been released first and foremost. Number two, the demand should have been for Iran to dismantle all of its centrifuges. Number three, give the IAEA unfettered 24/7, 365-day access. Number four, stop the exporting of terror to Syria, to Iraq, and everywhere else. Number five, denounce terrorism and prosecute those who perpetrate it. Restore civil rights in their own country. Number six, stop the death chant to America and Israel, and they need to recognize Israel's right to exist, even as a Jewish state, I might add. And number seven, Secretary Kerry, they've been a bad actor for 36 years, going back to 1979. So if this is not based on trust, if this is based on actions, shouldn't we have required them to show by their own actions? I don't know, say for half of the time since 1979, say 18 years, or a fourth of the time, 9 years? How about just 2 years? Shouldn't we have required them to show with their actions? You said in your exchange with Grace Ming earlier that Iran came to the table with enormous suspicions about the United States. And me and my colleague up here thinking, who cares? We're not the bad actors here. They're the ones exporting terrorism. Did you start from that basis of strength? And then if you did, how did we get here? You consider this to be a good deal?
Well, Congressman, plain and simple, all the things that you just listed, there never would have been a negotiation.
Oh, my heart pains for them. These are bad act. My heart pains for Iran. These are bad actors in the area.
Congressman, what you need to think about is our security. We are better off with Iran not having a nuclear weapon.
No question.
Our primary objective here was to have a negotiation because they were already at 19,000 centrifuges, already with enough material for 10 to 12 bombs, already enriching at 20%, and they were a step away from a plutonium reactor that could produce enough material for 1 to 2 bombs a year.
How long was
we stepped into that?
I get that.
And we've rolled it back.
You said that earlier. How long before we knew about Fordow?
Beg your pardon. We knew about Fordow. We discovered Fordow. We blew the whistle.
How long was it there before we knew about it?
I don't know the precise amount of time, but
10 years.
I know, but Congressman, we discovered that, and we also discovered.
I'm sorry.
Let me just tell you. In 2003, we discovered that they were actually trying to make a bomb, and we did it without inspectors, without this regime.
You've said all that. I get that, but it's about the trust that you keep saying that we're going to have.
No, there's no trust.
Well, you're saying you're implying that we can catch them at what they're doing. Yet Fordow went uncovered for about 10 or 12 years.
That's not trust.
We can supply that information.
Right, let me do this. I'm running.
Sir, we can classify in a classified environment.
We'll talk about that. I'm running out of time. Are you aware of the fact that today, Iran to United Nations, new sanctions could kill the nuclear deal? They are still uttering threats against us. I may remind us, we're not the bad actors here. In a letter to a 15-member body, Iran's UN envoy Gholami Khosrow, if I'm pronouncing it right, said Tehran, quote, may reconsider its commitments, end quote, under the nuclear pact if U.S., European, and UN sanctions lifted under the deal are, quote, impaired by continued application or the imposition of new sanctions with a nature and scope identical or similar to those that were in place prior to the implementation date, irrespective of whether such new sanctions are introduced on nuclear-related or other grounds, unless the issues are remedied within a reasonably short time. Today, they're threatening to walk away from this deal if we implement other sanctions on even other grounds. So you're saying the hostages are different?
We've got to go to Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the UN Security Council voting unanimously to support this nuclear deal with Iran, the toughest global sanctions will be dismantled in exchange for Iran's compliance. Practically speaking, what is the status of this UN resolution and the implications if Congress disapproves this deal and overrides presidential veto?
Well, Congressman, we built into this agreement a process that was kind of a compromise because our friends, our allies, thought they should go immediately to the UN and implement immediately. But because Congress had already voted to have a review period, we persuaded them to have a 90-day period during which time it could not be implemented. So they had their vote, but there is this grace period in order to protect the rights of Congress. And that was a balance between the desire of our friends to exercise their own sovereignty and do what they wanted under the UN versus our desire to try to protect Congress's right to review.
So if Congress does go through the review process and disapprove of the deal, at that point, what happens with the resolution?
If Congress were to override a veto and disapprove the deal, there would be no deal.
No, that UN resolution that was passed unanimously would no longer stand.
The entire deal dies because we can't lift the sanctions without the ability to waive, and that's been taken away, and that would be part of the vote. So we would see this deal die.
Okay, thank you.
Die without any other option. No alternative whatsoever.
Secretary Moniz, what evidence or materials could potentially be cleaned up or hidden within the 24-day period listed in the inspections regime?
Well, there would be an attempt, presumably, to replace flooring, do all kinds of cleanup, and as I said, we have experience in both the unclassified and classified arenas in terms of being able to detect very, very small amounts of uranium. So using nuclear materials, there would typically be a strong signature.
And if Iran fails to allow inspectors entry within that 24-day period, what consequences would they face and under what timeline?
Take it.
If they fail to do it, they are in material breach of the agreement. We can snap back all the sanctions, and obviously all options are available to us that are available today.
So immediately after that 24-day period, if they've still not allowed
They
inspectors
fail to
access.
live up to the 24-day period and provide the access, they are in material breach of this agreement. And if we had cause to have gone and asked for access to an undisclosed facility about which we have deep concerns, everybody will join with us in ratifying that concern, and we will be operating with the consent, if you will, of the international community because of Iran's noncompliance, which is one of the reasons why I believe we have huge leverage for compliance.
And after termination day, when the snapback mechanism will no longer apply, Iran will still be subject to the additional protocol. What are the consequences for if they violate that additional protocol after termination day?
We still have the power of bringing unilateral sanctions. The Congress and all of us can join together. We can go right back to where we were at square one, or we have obviously other options available to us.
I think the concern is that the time that it takes for those kinds of unilateral sanctions to apply, whether they be from the United States or from the global community, as we've seen from the past, what other immediate consequences would there be
if
at
they
that
are
point?
in material noncompliance in a way that is threatening? Obviously, we're in a much more serious kind of situation and confrontation with the potential, needless to say, of the president taking the most dramatic options.
I would just add, yes, exactly as Secretary Kerry said, that it would depend upon their motivation, what they were doing. Certainly, in my view, anything that shows movement towards a nuclear weapon would have to be responded to quite forcefully. I would also add, going back to something Congresswoman Meng asked, and I think it's relevant to your statements as well, is that the P5, by definition, have a special role in the NPT and a very, very strong interest in seeing its integrity maintained.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Scott Perry of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. We certainly appreciate your indulgence. We know it's been a long time. In the context of these statements is how I'd like to ask my questions. From 1994, so not too long ago, right? We're talking about 15-year context of this deal for the most strict portions of it. So from 1994, the entire world will be safer as we slow the spread of nuclear weapons is one statement, and also the United States and international inspectors will carefully monitor North Korea to make sure it keeps its commitments. And we all know that's, of course, quotes from President Clinton that none of that happened. I mean, North Korea is what it is, and we are where we are. Within that context, Secretary Kerry, reading your quote recently with a reporter from Al Arabiya, I don't know how to interpret at this point in time, except to take it at face value, in relation to chance of death to America, death to Israel. We're going to continue our policy. And then it's very troubling, it's very disturbing, it's very troubling, and we'll have to wait and see. What will we have to wait and see, Secretary Kerry? And before you answer, 1979, 52 U.S. hostages, 444 days. 1983, the U.S. Marine barracks, 241 Americans killed. 1992, the Israeli embassy in Argentina bombed. 2011, the attempted assassination of the Saudi ambassador in D.C., the killings and maimings of hundreds in Iraq and Afghanistan, not to mention support of the Assad, Hezbollah, Hamas, and activities in Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. What will we have to wait and see? What was your...
to see the implementation of the plan, Congressman. No, look, you and I can have a speech off if you want.
I don't want to have a speech off. I want to understand your comments.
We could have we could have a competition for who is angrier about some of the things Iran has done historically. We understand they've killed Americans. We understand what they did in Khobar terrorists. We understand all of this. But they were marching towards a nuclear weapon.
Mr. Secretary, you must understand, I appreciate this, my time. You must understand the American people see Iran as like a crocodile or a shark that does what it does. And we're saying, well, we're going to give the crocodile or the shark a few more teeth, and let's see if it does something different.
That's just not accurate. That's not accurate.
But that's what we see.
We have left in
Let me
place.
say this, too. You have said that we don't have a better option. You keep on saying, well, you haven't provided a better option.
Congressman,
First of all, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, it is not Congress's job. This is the administration. And if you would use the treaty process as provided by the Constitution, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. Furthermore, you know, you say, well, this is the only deal we can get, that there's no better deal. Congress has a long history of instituting better deals. Example are 200 treaties, including 80 multilateral accords modified by Congress, including the Arms Control Agreement, SALT II, and the Threshold Test Ban Treaty that failed to reach a vote and were modified. So there is a history for that of getting a better deal. And if the Ayatollah doesn't like it and doesn't want to negotiate it, oh, boo-hoo. We're here for America. We stand for America. You represent America. With that having been said, you know, in another interview, if you don't get a majority in Congress to support this deal, doesn't that undermine the deal? And your statement, it's abbreviated, they don't care over there. And I'm assuming you mean Iraq, as long as the deal is implemented. And that's what we care about, that this deal being implemented. So do you care more about this deal or the UN's approval or American sovereignty and the approval of the American people through their duly elected representatives, Mr. Secretary?
Congressman, I don't need any lessons from you about who I represent. I've represented and fought for our country since I was out of college.
And God bless you for your
so
service.
Don't give me any
sir.
lessons about that, okay? Now, let me just make it crystal clear to you. This is America's interest, because America is the principal guarantor of security in the region, and particularly with respect to some of our closest friends. Now, we believe that Iran was marching towards a weapon or the capacity to have a weapon, and we've rolled that back, Congress.
Okay, that's your opinion.
That's
I understand
indisputable.
That's your belief.
No,
Let me ask you this.
that's
Let
a
me ask you
fact.
this, Mr. Secretary.
That's a fact.
Is it possible that Iran will acquire Russian air defense missiles in relation to the arms embargo lifting to protect nuclear sites? Possible or not possible?
Say that again.
Is it possible that Iran will acquire Russian air defense missiles to protect nuclear sites?
Those are not in the agreement. They have A300s that...
In the relation to the arms embargo lifting?
No, they're not banned by the arms embargo. They're outside of it.
We're going to Mr. Brandon Boyle of Pennsylvania, and my intention is to keep going to give our junior members an opportunity to ask their questions.
Thank you. I actually want to direct my question to Secretary Moniz, and I'm probably going to be a little boring here, but I have a very technical question that when I asked the White House and the President specifically, he directed it to you, saying that you're one of the top 10 experts in the world on this. So with that buildup, there was a report about 6 days ago in the New York Times that really questioned this issue of the 24 days. And there are some, such as you said earlier, that say, look, 24 days, it's not exactly like you're flushing a whole program down the toilet. That certainly wouldn't be enough time in which to hide illicit behavior. The former deputy director of the IAEA contradicted that and said that while it's true with some of the larger scale operations, some things such as manufacturing uranium components as well as triggers actually could be covered up in the 24 days. So I'm really trying to get a clear answer on this issue, because I actually think it's one of the key components when trying to look at this in an intellectually honest way to see if we really have a verifiable deal here.
Yes, and I've spoken with Mr. Heinonen. Of course, he's up the river from MIT at Harvard these days. But the issue really I want to emphasize what I've always said is that work with nuclear materials, we have very, very high confidence in terms of finding microscopic amounts there. When you go to things like triggers, things that do not involve nuclear materials but are important for a nuclear explosive, then that gets into a higher stage of requirement. As I've said, and in a classified environment, we could talk a little bit more about it. Even there can be some signals, some signals that are quite interesting and certainly may be quite detectable. But certainly one gets further away from the nuclear materials, then there are more possibilities of both cover-up and for at least maybe semi-credible explanations for pursuing other activities. For example, any military does work with conventional explosives in chambers. So the question is, was that work around certain hemispherical shapes, for example, with multi-point detonation, and that requires just more and more investigation. But nuclear materials leave quite significant signatures typically.
I wanted to, just with only a couple minutes, let me switch because this is something that the Israeli ambassador raised in my office and has been raised a couple of times, and again, I think is a legitimate. I realize that some of this is bash the administration and that is part of politics. But there are those of us on the Democratic side who do have real, genuine concerns. The 24-day is one of them. The other is the question of how exactly we bring forward and what we have to reveal in terms of our intelligence to demand or request that a site is being inspected. It has been pointed out that we would have to reveal why exactly we suspect the site, meaning we would have to compromise where we got intelligence and why we suspect it. Can you talk about how that process would work and how much we would have to reveal to the Iranians just in order to inspect the site?
Well, that's something that ultimately you really should pick up with the intelligence community, obviously, and certainly protecting sources and methods is particularly important. Now, having said that, clearly in the past, intelligence agencies from many countries have been able to share information. And I also note that, of course, 4 out of the 7 countries involved in the talks work together quite closely, namely the Europeans and the United States. And I think we would do all that we could to provide the IAEA with relevant information that would point to a suspicious site, no matter where it was. But clearly, again, in terms of sources and methods, I think you have to go to the.
Yeah, could I ask Secretary Kerry to weigh in on?
Yeah,
Congressman.
that point? I've been through this kind of thing a little bit on occasion, and we're very careful not to disclose sources and methods. And we have ways of providing information and making it available in ways that don't compromise that. I can assure you that will not happen. It's not something that our community feels prevented or stopped by. But let me just point out, because you mentioned the Israeli ambassador was in there talking to you about these concerns. Sandy Levin is the longest serving Jewish member of the United States Congress, and he came out today.
I read his statement.
And he was asked about it, and he said, Israel's security has and always will be of critical importance to me and our country. I believe that Israel, the region, and the world are far more secure if Iran does not move towards the possession of a nuclear weapon. I believe the agreement is the best way to achieve that.
We're going to Mr. Ron DeSantis of Florida. There's a vote on. There's 2 minutes remaining.
Secretary Moniz, with respect to the agreement between Iran and the IAEA for Parchin and the possible military dimensions, have you read those documents or agreements?
No, sir, I have not seen them.
Okay, and you, to your knowledge, nobody in the U.S. government has a copy of the agreements?
To my knowledge, we do not have a copy. Again, in Vienna, we had very broad oral, I had at least a broad oral briefing, but I never saw any paper.
So you were briefed in Vienna before the JCPOA was announced?
Yes.
Shortly before, yes.
Who briefed you?
DG Amano.
Okay. And do you have any plans to request that those documents be provided to Congress, consistent with the Iran Nuclear Review Act?
I don't know if it is consistent, so I'll check with our folks and make a determination. I don't think we judge that it is consistent, but we'll as we've said, we will certainly brief the contents.
Well, if you
appropriate
don't,
classified
if
session.
you could provide us the rationale for why you don't think the definition of agreement would encompass.
Well, I said I don't know. Congressman, I just said I don't know.
No, I know,
Not
but
gonna
I'm saying
make
if
an
you'd make
important
that determination,
decision
if you
off-
could provide us the kind of the legal justification so that we can
Well, of
look
course
at
we'd
it.
have to. Of course we'd do that.
Okay,
Sure.
very good. There was a report on the Associated Press today that the agreement between Iran and the IAEA may not be completed. There was something about maybe Iran would be the one to take the soil samples. Can you guys comment? Is it in fact still being negotiated between Iran and the IAEA?
In session here, we can't discuss what the methodology is. We're happy to take this on in classified session.
Can you confirm the AP story? Have you seen it?
Absolutely not. I can't.
You cannot, and because
I
of the
cannot
session.
confirm it.
Okay.
I've seen it, among other things. But.
Secretary Moniz, we get into, obviously it's a very complex agreement. We get into a lot of different things, obviously very important, and I know you guys worked hard on it, but sometimes I just like to take a step back. And just a few years ago, it had been pretty much the general policy of the United States that an agreement would be simply Iran gives up its nuclear program, no enrichment. The UN had always said no enrichment. The president, when he was debating Governor Romney in 2012, said the deal we'll accept is that they end their nuclear program. It's very straightforward. Secretary Moniz, do you acknowledge that this agreement, I know you guys think it's good, and let's put that aside, but do you acknowledge that this agreement doesn't meet that standard of where they're ending their nuclear program, that they are allowed to maintain a significant nuclear program? The international community is going to be helping them develop nuclear technology. I know you guys are going to say that you're confident you'll be able to detect if that's used in a military capacity, but that does represent a change, does it not, from where we were just a few years ago?
Congressman, I've had conversations with members of the prior administration, and I'm not going to, it's inappropriate for me to tell you who or speak for them. But I think if you talk to them, you will learn that they had come to a conclusion by the end of that administration that that policy wasn't working and that they were going to need to, in fact, have some structure of enrichment and some structure of a program. There's a distinction here between Iran's nuclear weapons capacity and a peaceful nuclear program. Unlike North Korea, which pulled out of the NPT, Iran is still a signatory to the NPT. Iran has not exploded an ordnance. Iran has not yet, gone forward to make a weapon, even though they had enough material for 10 to 12 bombs. So Iran is stating in this agreement its willingness to comply with and live within the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, countries have a right to a peaceful nuclear program.
So just so I get clear with the question, you're acknowledging that there has been a reappraisal in kind of the goalposts, and it's one that's been shared by both people in the Bush administration and the Obama administration.
I don't think they shared it publicly, but they shared it with us privately, and it's a point
that
of view.
May I just add that the construct going in then, and this was among the P5+1, that our basic construct would be to get the 1 year breakout time to fissile
Understood.
material.
I'm almost at time. So, Secretary Kerry, just real quickly, because this is not going to be ratified as a treaty, there are a lot of states, in Florida particularly, where state legislatures have enacted sanctions against Iran in various capacities. Do you acknowledge that this deal will not affect states' ability to do it? Since it's not going to be approved as a treaty, it's not going to be considered the supreme law of the land. It'll be more of an executive to an executive agreement?
That's accurate, but we would urge those states, if Iran is fully complying with this agreement, we will take steps to urge them not to interfere with that.
Mr. Ted Yoho of Florida, and don't feel compelled to use all your time.
Yes, sir, I understand. I appreciate it. Appreciate you all being here. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you a simple yes or no question. The Iran Sanctions Act expires on December 30th or 31st, 2016. Will this administration support legislation simply extending Iran Sanctions Act so that the nuclear-related sanctions it provides for can be snapped back if Iran is caught cheating?
Yeah.
It's a yes or no.
Well, we obviously are committed to the ISA, but I don't think any decision has been made on timing or what steps the president will take.
Well, can we do the snapbacks without this?
Yes, we can.
We have
according
other
to this, we
existing
can't because the Iran Sanctions Act expires.
Well,
And those are
Congressman,
necessary to
No,
have
we
the snapbacks.
We have other existing authorities where we could snap back both financial and.
Can you guarantee this body that those acts or facilities are going to be in place so that snapback does work without
Yes.
an act of Congress?
Yes.
And I have a problem with the secret deals that are going on, and you're asking us to support this deal without being able to read it. It kind of reminds me of the health care law. I don't want to be in that situation. You're asking us to vote on something. We don't know what's in that deal. And I think
You
it's
will.
very disingenuous to ask us as members of the representatives of the United States citizens to vote on a deal without knowing what's in it.
Well, we're not. We said that we would. I've said to 3 or 4 congressmen.
I heard that, but
brief.
it's not clear that the information is going to be forthright. We're going to get briefings, but briefings is not the same as being able to read the actual agreement. And I realize it's the IAEA with Iran, but, you know, we're paying 25% of the budget of that place. I think we, as the representatives of the American people, we deserve that. And I won't support this without that.
May I add, Congressman?
Congressman, on the Iran Sanctions Act, can I just add 2 things? First, it doesn't expire till the end of 2016, and now would not be the appropriate time. It's premature to take action. And I think respectfully, we know that if there's a problem in 2016, it won't take very long for Congress to act.
Well, and you say it's premature to take action, and this will be my last question or statement, I think. You say this is the best deal we get, and if we walk away from the table, we walk away alone. I feel that this negotiating team put America in that situation because of the way you negotiated this from the very beginning. If we go back to the very beginning, Iran will not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Iran, and you said, Mr. Secretary, I heard it come out of your mouth, anywhere, anytime, any place. That's been passed on. We're beyond that point, and it's beyond the point of trying to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. We're trying to prevent something that we can't instead of preparing for that which we will have. And we have been boxed into a bad corner because you guys negotiated from weakness instead of as the superpower, and you go into the UN to get their approval first so that we look like the bad guys. This is a bad deal, and I think if we operate from a level of strength, Iran will come back to the negotiating table. To think that they're going to come back to the negotiating table a year or 2 from now, I think that's a fallacy, and I think it's disingenuous to America.
I urge you, Congressman, with all respect, to spend time with the intel community. I think you will hear a very different judgment from them about
No disrespect, but
back.
we get those people in here all the time. We sit in intelligence
And
briefings,
secondly,
and we hear from them, and they are telling us this is a bad deal. And if you say, and President Obama says this is going to make America safer, Israel
Congressman,
safer,
the intelligence
wait a minute,
community
and
supports
the
this
Middle
deal.
East safer, but yet the intelligence community is telling us to build missile defense systems on the East Coast, bolster the ones on the West Coast and Alaska, because this is Great deal.
The intelligence
I
community
think we should run away.
Not saying
I'm going to
this
yield
is a
back.
bad
Thank
deal.
you.
The intelligence community supports this deal, Congressman. And what's more, they were an integral part of helping to shape it. And furthermore, the reason we were able to get the good deal we got is because we did operate out of a position of strength, which is why they are dismantling 2/3 of their program, undoing their stockpile, living by restraints on their enrichment, and have accepted the additional protocol, as well as 25-year restraints on their uranium and so forth.
So we'll go to Mr.
disagree with you.
May I
Ribble of Wisconsin.
The remaining time. Just to add to Mr. Congressman that the agreement is that IAEA and Iran, the IAEA will complete its PMD. That's the agreement.
Ms.
The rest
Ribble.
is a protocol.
Thank you. Secretary Kerry, earlier in the hearing today, you said that countries in the future, if the Congress rejects the deal, countries in the future will not trust negotiating with the U.S. State Department because they're now negotiating with 535 individual members of Congress. For 228 years, the Constitution provided a way out of that mess by allowing treaties to be with the advice and consent of 67 U.S. senators. Why is this not considered a treaty?
Well, Congressman, I spent quite a few years trying to get a lot of treaties through the United States Senate, and frankly, it's become physically impossible. That's why. Because you can't pass a treaty anymore. And it's become impossible to, schedule. It's become impossible to pass. And I sat there leading the charge on the Disabilities Treaty, which fell to basically ideology and politics. So I think that's the reason why.
Yeah, okay. I may not disagree with that. I mean, the political world around here is pretty challenging for both political parties, and certainly for the Congress and the President. I would say this, that one of the concerns that been voiced to me by my constituents is the fact that in the President's press conference about this agreement, he threatened to veto the Congress's action if we didn't agree with them anyway. And so there was this arbitrary poke in the nose of the Congress when it was unnecessary. And so my folks back home are saying, I want to have some say in this. And my only say is through you. And so I think that maybe could have been handled a little bit different. Secretary Moniz, is it a... Go ahead, Secretary.
No, I understand.
Okay. Secretary Moniz, is it not billions of dollars cheaper to build a natural gas power plant rather than a nuclear power plant? Why do you suppose the Iranians have gone down the nuclear road when they're so carbon rich? I mean, they've got a trillion gallons of reserves of natural gas. Wouldn't it have been much cheaper for them if the idea was just peaceful electricity to have gone that route?
Well, a natural gas power plant has lower capital cost, but typically a nuclear plant has lower operating costs. That's one point.
In this case, the natural gas would be free to them.
Well,
the primary energy source.
I'm not sure it's free. Certainly, in the sense, I'm not arguing one way or the other, but just what the argument is that it's more valuable than as an export product, where, of course, with LNG prices, for example, in parts of the world, there's quite a bit of rent to be captured.
Yeah, sure. Secretary Lew, appreciate your patience today. Haven't been called on that much, but in light of how penalizing the economic sanctions have been on this economy, it still strikes me odd that Iran would continue to move toward this very, very expensive construction project as opposed to other alternatives. Does this seem odd to you? I mean, there's billions of dollars to build a nuclear power plant.
Which expense?
The expense of actually constructing nuclear power plants, they've been under great stress economically.
Look, I think that they have been under enormous stress. Like any government, they make decisions based on their short and their long-term needs. I can't question why they've chosen one form of a power plant over another. What I do know is their infrastructure, including their power infrastructure, is highly inadequate. In order to have a foundation for economic growth, they do need more power. And that's going to require investment. It's one of the reasons that I believe they have domestic needs that far exceed any relief they're going to get. Their domestic infrastructure is in a pretty bad condition right now.
Well, it seemed to me that one of the possible solutions to this whole deal would have been for the P5+1 countries to assist them in building alternative sources of electrical power to meet that need, as opposed to setting this canard up where now in 15 years, if they choose, they can go ahead and nuclearize from a weaponry standpoint. And with that, I'll go ahead and yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Trott and Mr. Zeldin. If you can keep these comments brief, there's votes going on the floor. Mr. Trott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for being here and for your service. Secretary Kerry, you said in your opening statement that there have been major distortions, and President Obama actually said yesterday that there have been no factual arguments on the other side that are worth scrutiny. So let's simply yes or no, are these the facts that are basing the negotiations off of at the outset? They're holding American hostages, they're sponsoring terrorism, calling for death to America, want Israel wiped from the face of the earth, guilty of egregious human rights violations, and generally creating instability around the world. Are those facts true, yes or no?
Yeah, they are. But
so would you say that those facts looked in collectively would suggest that Iran is guilty of bad behavior?
Well, I think it's more than just bad behavior. They're destabilizing countries and blowing people up somewhere is beyond bad behavior.
So I'll take that as a yes. And so how would a deal, let's say I wanted to sell my business to Lee. Back when I was in the business world, we were doing an acquisition, I'd always say to my team, you can't do a good deal with a bad guy. So can you sort of understand our concern about this deal? Because it sure looks like, if we're doing a good deal, as you suggest, it's with a bad guy.
I understand exactly what you're saying, and it's you know, we confronted questions about what could be achieved or not achieved in the course of these negotiations ourselves, and came to the conclusion, therefore, that nothing is based on trust, that we are going to set up something that you can read, we can read, that everybody can understand what the expectations are. And that's one of the reasons why, from a position of strength, we believe we achieved something that really helps establish some level of confidence over the years, and that's the level to which they will reduce their current program, reduce their stockpile, live by limitations on enrichment, which are absolutely ascertainable, and so forth. So we've created, we think, a dynamic here where you get over the hurdle of the things you don't like and are bad behavior, because you've created something that is verifiable and has certainty in it.
Is there any chance that Iran's strategy is to get the deal signed, get the $50 billion, and then a year or so down the road start to violate the agreement, knowing
as we
that?
Said earlier.
Yeah, and I know that's the challenge of going last or next to last, but I appreciate you staying. But isn't there a chance a year from now it's going to be a whole lot more difficult for us to get the band back together and be able to put in place some of the protections that led to this point?
Not if they're breaking the agreement.
So
not if
Russia and China are just going to go along and say, gosh, United States, we understand your concern, and what can we do to get back in
We're convinced about the seriousness of purpose of all of our 5 other partners in this effort.
Are there any, hindsight's 2020, and I'm not asking you to necessarily evaluate how we got to this point, but there's any credibility to the concern that I think someone earlier mentioned that maybe decisions by Ambassador Rice or the administration or your negotiating team really put us in a position now where if we don't sign this deal, we're really left without any good options? Any concern in hindsight we could have done things a little differently? Maybe UN Resolution 1929, other decisions that were made along the way that put us in this box in terms of having no great options?
Well, we think we have a great option. The great option is the agreement that we came to. And we did not create the box, by the way. You guys decided you wanted to review it. Now you're reviewing it. And I'm sorry about the consequences of that review, but that's not our creation. The consequences of the review are the reality that this agreement can, not go forward. And there are consequences to that.
Well, I have no regrets, sir, about having the responsibility of reviewing this agreement.
And we're not arguing with you about your right to do it.
Right.
But we are arguing that the consequences, when you weigh the benefit of this agreement going through versus the consequence of not doing it, are serious.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
One last question, sir, and I appreciate your time. But you said earlier that this was never about making sure Iran did not have a nuclear program, but rather about making sure they did not have a nuclear weapon.
The capacity to build a nuclear weapon or to get one.
So what did President Obama or candidate Obama mean in the debate with Mitt Romney in 2012 when he said the deal we will accept is they end their nuclear program? It's very straightforward. So he really was just talking about the capacity to create a nuclear weapon, not
having
program.
played Mitt Romney for him in preparation for that debate, I can assure you that's what he meant.
Okay. Thank you for your time again, sir. I hope you're doing all right on your crutches. I spent a lot.
Just now, in response to Mr. Ribble's question, I just want to understand, with regards to a treaty, you said this isn't a treaty because it was difficult to pass. Is that correct?
Well, it's not no. There are a lot of other reasons. We felt that we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran. It's very complicated with 6 other countries. It's just very complicated process. So we thought that the easiest way to get something that had the leverage, had the accountability, could achieve our goal, was through a political agreement.
Yeah,
and that's what we have.
And Mr. Secretary, if you would be able to submit for the record just a little more background as to why this is not treated as a treaty, I think it would be helpful for us to understand.
Absolutely, sure. I'd be happy to do it.
And you said a little bit earlier the reason why Iran came to the table is because they wanted the relief from the sanctions. The Iranian Supreme Leader said the Islamic Republic of Iran will not give up support of its friends in the region, the oppressed people of Palestine, of Yemen, the Syrian and Iraqi governments, the oppressed people of Bahrain, and sincere resistance fighters in Lebanon and Palestine. Now, there is so much state sponsorship of terror in that list, Mr. Secretary. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said this past weekend the United States remains the great Satan both before and after the nuclear accord. The leverage, as you said, that brought the Iranians to the negotiating table was the sanctions relief. Let me just recap just some of the stuff that wasn't even part of the negotiations. Iran developing ICBMs, overthrowing foreign governments, sponsoring terror. They're unjustly imprisoning United States citizens, including a Marine and a pastor, a reporter, pledging to wipe Israel off the map, chanting death to America. None of that was even part of the negotiations. Iran's neighbors who know them the best trust them the least. It's just something for us to think about. I would also ask if you can submit for the record, just for sake of time, a little bit more in the plan as for stopping all the other Iranian terror that wasn't part of the deal. I think it would be very helpful for Congress to have a better sense of what the plan is regarding everything that wasn't part of the deal. And Mr. Secretary, if we remove the sanctions, we're removing the leverage that brought the Iranians to the table. Over 70 years ago, a leader of the free world held up a document, declared it peace for our time. I'm afraid that many years from now, if the American people, through their representatives in Congress, accept this bad deal, that just like the Munich Agreement of 1938, this Iranian agreement will prove to not be in the best interest of American security or the stability and safety of the free world. There is an alternative other than war. It's a better deal. Now, you said getting a better deal is fantasy land. Some other stuff that I would consider fantasy land is believing that you have access to military sites when the Iranian leadership tells us that we don't. Fantasy land is agreeing to a 3-member advisory board where one of the members is declared an independent member, but there is no details in the agreement whatsoever as to how that independent member is selected. Fantasy land is saying that there is a secret deal with Iran, that there is no secret deal with Iran and the IAEA, even though we're acknowledging that there is an agreement and that it's secret. Fantasy land is saying that this deal provides 24/7 where necessary, when necessary inspections, which don't in fact exist. Fantasy land is saying that Iran does not want to destroy the United States, dismissing their Death to America pledge as just rhetoric. I don't believe that this is a great option, as you just said to the last person. I know it. The American public knows it, that there is an alternative other than war, and it's a better deal. America got played like a 5-string quartet. Mr. Secretary, a lot of Americans have fought and died to make our country the greatest nation in the world. And you, sir, respectfully, you don't have the power to surrender our greatness. And I would strongly, with all these hypotheticals, that if Congress rejects this deal, that everything falls apart. You have not yet answered what you would do next. What would you 3 secretaries do if Congress rejects the deal? Because the answer on the next day is that no one shows up to work. No one is working with the international community to try to protect America and the free world. So if Congress rejects this deal, when you wake up the next morning, sir, what would you do?
Well, Congressman, you threw a lot out there all at once. All of us take affront at the comments that are made publicly by many people in Iran, whether it's a general or a leader of one kind or another, or the Ayatollah's comments. What is important is what Iran does, not what it says, what it does. For 2 years now, Iran lived by a deal that many of your colleagues here called an historic mistake, but they lived by it. They've actually rolled their program back, and President Obama is the first president in the United States who has challenged this issue, who's actually rolled the Iranian program back significantly and stopped them from the path to get a weapon. Now,
Mr. Secretary,
we have laid out. No,
with all due respect, for sake of time,
with all due respect,
just
I
asking
think,
what you would do the next morning. You have not answered the question
I'm
of
coming to that.
what the administration would do.
Mr. Zeldin, there's a vote on, and your time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you could submit that to the record, I think it's important for Congress to know what you would do next.
Sure.
I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today. These are not easy issues. Congress will be taking a historical vote on this agreement in September. The committee will continue doing its job before that vote and after. And I thank each of our witnesses again for being with us today and staying through the process of having all of the members ask their questions. We stand adjourned.